Yo, what's up everyone? It's Harryverse X, and today we're checking out, what if Deadpool adopted Harry at age 3 and fourth wall-breaking regeneration made every Death Eater terrified. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Man on the Doorstep. The night Albus Dumbledore placed Harry Potter on the doorstep of number 4, Privet Drive, he felt certain he was doing the right thing. He was wrong. But he wouldn't find that out for 8 years. The bundle of blankets barely stirred when Dumbledore set it down. The sleeping toddler nestled against the cold stone step like something precious being stored for safekeeping. McGonagall had argued against it. Hagrid had cried about it. Dumbledore had smiled his oldest, most certain smile and explained about blood wards and Lily's sacrifice and the ancient magic that would protect Harry here, with family, with blood. What he had not accounted for, what no amount of centuries-old wisdom could have prepared him for, was the man who rounded the corner of Privet Drive at 11:47 p.m., whistling something that sounded like the theme from the A-Team, with a katana strapped to his back and taco sauce on his mask. Wade Wilson stopped walking. He looked at the baby. He looked at the perfectly ordinary house. He looked up at the sky, directly at nothing in particular, and said, "You've got to be kidding me." There was no response from the universe, which was typical. Wade crouched down. The toddler was maybe 2, maybe 3, he was bad at guessing ages, he was bad at a lot of things, but what he was good at was recognizing a bad situation when he saw one. The baby had a lightning bolt scar on his forehead that was still faintly pink, like a wound that had closed faster than it should have. He was wearing a onesie that said "Daddy's Little Monster" in cheerful yellow letters, which was either deeply ironic or deeply tragic. His hair was a catastrophic black mess even in sleep. And he was alone on a doorstep in November. "Okay," Wade said quietly. He tilted his head. The little kid's nose scrunched in sleep. "Okay, so here's the thing." He wasn't talking to the kid. "I know what this is. I can feel what this is. There's a whole narrative happening here that I am tangentially aware of, and it involves this kid growing up in that house," he pointed at number 4, with its perfect garden and its locked door and its complete and total indifference to the child on its step, getting absolutely emotionally destroyed by whatever relatives live inside, spending the next 8 years being told he's worthless, and then being retrieved by an old bearded man to go fight a dark wizard that already tried to kill him once. Wade paused. "Do I have that about right?" The knight said nothing. A cat yowled somewhere down the street. "Yeah," Wade said. "Yeah, I thought so." He looked at the kid for a long moment. The kid had eyelashes that were frankly unreasonable for a toddler. He looked soft and small and deeply, enormously unfair as a concept, this tiny human being parked on a doorstep like an unwanted package, like something to be dealt with later, like a problem someone else would solve. Wade had been someone else's problem his whole life. He picked Harry up. It was not a graceful motion. Wade Wilson had held exactly 0 children before this moment, and it showed. He grabbed the kid like he was picking up a cat that might scratch him, then adjusted when the weight of him settled against Wade's chest and the kid made a soft, unconscious sound and turned his face into the leather jacket. Wade went very still. "Okay," he said again, much more quietly. "Okay, yeah." He stood there for 30 seconds. Harry's small fist had found the lapel of Wade's jacket and closed around it in sleep, the grip surprisingly strong for someone who weighed about as much as a large sandwich. "Right," Wade said. "Right, we're doing this. I'm doing this. This is a thing I'm doing." He looked up the street, then down the street. He looked at the door of number 4. He thought about knocking. He thought about what was behind that door. He could practically feel it, the specific density of resentment and small-mindedness that lived in houses like this, and he made a decision. He did not knock. He turned around, walked to the end of Privet Drive, hailed a cab despite the katana, and left. The letter tucked into Harry's blanket that said "to whom it may concern" in Dumbledore's looping handwriting fluttered once in the cold November wind and then lay still on an empty doorstep. The first year was, in Wade's professional assessment, completely insane. Not bad insane. Just, insane. The kind of insane that involved showing up at a hospital with a toddler and no documentation and a regenerating facial condition and spinning a story that fell apart approximately every 15 seconds until he gave up spinning stories and just stared at the admissions nurse with the particular intensity of a man who has been through considerably worse than a clipboard, and she, wisely, processed the paperwork. He got a pediatrician. That was its own adventure. He got a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. He'd been doing fine on contract work and had more money saved than he knew what to do with, because dead men didn't shop much, and he bought approximately $400 worth of children's furniture in a single IKEA run that he still couldn't entirely remember without his left eye twitching. He named the kid Harry. Obviously. He kept the last name Potter because it seemed important, somehow, in a way he didn't have the vocabulary to articulate yet, like the kid deserved to keep the thing his parents had given him, even if they hadn't gotten to give him anything else. Harry James Potter Wilson, according to the documents that Weasel helped him forge, which were phenomenal documents and which Weasel was paid for in tacos. The thing Wade had not expected, the thing that genuinely surprised him, which was a short list, was how easy it was to love the kid. He'd expected it to be a project. An obligation. Something he'd committed to in a moment of narrative awareness and fourth-wall sentimentality and would now have to honor through gritted teeth and sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. He'd expected to be bad at it in ways that mattered, the big ways, the ways that left marks. He was bad at it in the small ways. He burned breakfast approximately every other morning. He forgot that 3-year-olds couldn't watch Predator. He had no idea how to do the black catastrophe of Harry's hair, and the kid went around for the first 6 months looking like a small dandelion clock in a lightning bolt headband. He talked too much and too graphically about his work, and had to develop a whole secondary vocabulary of substitutions. Contracts became errands, targets became difficult clients, definitely blood became ketchup with the frequency and confidence of a man who has fully committed to a lie. But Harry, who had the emotional radar of someone who'd been surviving on instinct since before he could walk, never seemed to need the big things from Wade. He didn't need Wade to be perfect. He needed Wade to be there, and Wade was catastrophically, relentlessly there. At 3 a.m. when Harry had nightmares he couldn't explain. At the playground when the other kids' parents looked at Wade with the specific expression of people who had called a number on a missing persons database and were waiting for someone to confirm their suspicions. At the kitchen table at 7 a.m. with cereal that was somehow both burned and soggy, which was an achievement, watching Harry eat with the cheerful, absolute focus of a small person who had decided this was good and there was nothing further to discuss. "Dad," Harry said one morning, when he was about 4, not looking up from his cereal. Wade, who had been reading the newspaper with his feet on the table, lowered it. It was the first time Harry had called him that. He'd been working up to it, had been saying Wade for months with the careful precision of a child who has been coached, which Wade hadn't actually done, and then hey you with the breezy confidence of someone who's realized the distinction might not matter, and now, yeah, bud. Is ketchup supposed to be on the ceiling? Wade looked up. It was, in fact, on the ceiling. From 3 Tuesdays ago. He'd been meaning to deal with that. "It's modern art," he said. Harry considered this with enormous seriousness. "Okay," he said, and went back to his cereal. Wade put the newspaper back up. His hands were very steady. Everything was fine. Everything was completely fine. By the time Harry was 6, he had opinions. This was Wade's fault and he knew it. He'd raised the kid talking, constantly, relentlessly talking, narrating everything, explaining everything, asking Harry's opinion on everything from what to have for dinner to whether the neighbor's new fence was an act of aggression or just bad taste. He'd asked because it was habit, because silence had always felt like an ambush waiting to happen, because talking was the only tool he'd ever been any good at. And Harry had opinions. Strong ones. Delivered with the absolute conviction of someone who had been told, repeatedly, that his take on things mattered. "That guy is watching us," Harry said, one afternoon in a Brooklyn diner, very calmly, over a plate of pancakes. Wade looked up from his menu. There was, in fact, a man 3 tables over who had been making a very poor effort at casual surveillance. Tan coat, nervous eyes, the particular stillness of someone trying hard to look like they weren't trying. "Yep," Wade said. "Good catch. What's he want?" "Probably information about a contract I wrapped up last week." "Nothing exciting." He paused. "Don't look at him." Harry, who had been looking directly at the man, looked down at his pancakes with the patient expression of someone humoring an adult. "He's nervous," he said. "His left knee keeps bouncing. He should be nervous. I'm having pancakes and I hate to be interrupted during pancakes." "What happens if he interrupts your pancakes?" "Nothing violent," Wade said. "Probably. I haven't decided yet." "Eat your food." Harry ate his food. The man left without approaching them. Wade left a 20% tip because the waitress had remembered Harry's orange juice without being asked, which in Wade's hierarchy of virtues ranked just below genuine heroism. "Dad," Harry said, while they were walking home. "Why does my head sometimes feel like a bad dream that's already happening?" Wade stopped walking. Harry wasn't scared when he said it. That was the thing, he never framed it with fear, just with the same matter-of-fact curiosity he brought to everything, like it was a puzzle he was waiting for Wade to hand him the right piece for. His green eyes, Lily's eyes, though Wade didn't know whose eyes they'd been, only that they were extraordinary, looked up at Wade with the particular patience of a child who trusted that the answer was coming. Wade crouched down to eye level. He did this every time a serious conversation came up. He'd decided early on that having to look up at someone made being honest harder. "Like a bad dream happening where?" he asked. Harry touched his forehead. "The scar. Does it hurt?" "Not exactly. More like," Harry scrunched his face with the effort of finding words. "Like something's knocking on a door but you can't find the door." Wade looked at the scar for a moment. He'd looked it up, over the years, found the books, the hidden community, the fragments of a story that the magical world kept to themselves with the specific arrogance of people who thought that not being noticed meant not being real. He knew enough. He knew what had made that scar and he knew what that meant, and he'd been carrying that knowledge for 3 years like a stone in his chest. "I'm going to tell you something," Wade said. "And I need you to hear all of it, not just the exciting parts." "Okay. There's a world you were born into. A whole world, with magic in it, that most people don't know about. And in that world, when you were very little, before I found you, someone tried to hurt you." He watched Harry's face. Nothing flinched. "Something about you, something your mom left you when she died protecting you, meant that it didn't work. But it left a mark. On you and," he paused, choosing words carefully, "and on the thing that tried to hurt you. That door in your head. That's that. That's the connection." Harry was quiet for a moment. A pigeon walked past with the immense dignity of a pigeon that has somewhere to be. "Is it going to try again?" Harry asked. "Probably," Wade said honestly, because he had promised himself he would always be honest with Harry about the things that mattered. "Not for a while. But probably." Harry thought about this. "Okay," he said. "What do we do about it?" Wade looked at his kid, this small, serious, extraordinary kid who had responded to the news that a dark wizard might be coming for him with the same energy he brought to deciding what to have for lunch, and felt something in his chest that he had no word for, something that was either profound love or profound terror or both at the same time. "We get ready," Wade said. "We learn. And when it comes," he tapped Harry's forehead, very gently, right beside the scar. "That door goes both ways, kid." Harry's face split into a grin. "Cool," he said, with enormous feeling. Getting ready, in Wade's framework, meant a lot of things. It meant teaching Harry to fight, starting when Harry was 7, with the kind of patient thoroughness that Wade applied to very few things in his life. Not just the physical mechanics, though they covered those too, the footwork and the balance and the way to fall without getting hurt, but the thinking of it. How to read a room. How to know where the exits were before you needed them. How to look at someone and understand in 3 seconds what they wanted and what they were afraid of. Harry took to it the way he took to most things, with focused, cheerful competence that occasionally gave way to bouts of pure stubbornness. "You're dropping your left shoulder," Wade said, watching Harry work through a sequence on the mat in their living room, which had been converted to a training space with a practicality that the IKEA furniture had not survived. "I know, I'm doing it on purpose." "Why would you drop your shoulder on purpose?" "Because when I do, you always come at me from the right, and then I can." Harry pivoted, brought his elbow up in a move that was 3 steps ahead of where the conversation had been, and tapped Wade on the jaw with the flat of his palm. Wade blinked. Harry grinned. "Okay," Wade said. "That was good. But if you're doing that against someone who doesn't have a tells pattern you've memorized, you're leaving your ribs open for a solid 2 seconds, and most people who want to hurt you will find those 2 seconds and live inside them." Harry's grin didn't go away, it just changed shape. "Then I guess I'd better learn everyone's tells pattern." Wade pointed at him. "That's either very smart or very concerning. Why can't it be both?" He was 8. He was 8 years old and he was doing this. Wade was aggressively, outrageously proud, and he showed it in the only way he knew how, which was by immediately making the next session harder. The magic started when Harry was 8.5, which was exactly as dramatic as you'd expect. Wade came home from a contract, an errand, he corrected himself, old habits, to find Harry sitting cross-legged in the middle of the kitchen with every single loose object in the apartment orbiting him at roughly eye height in a slow, deliberate rotation. Cups, pens, a stapler, his math homework, 3 takeout menus, and the ketchup from the incident on the ceiling which had apparently never actually been cleaned up and had just been hiding. Harry looked up. "I didn't do that on purpose," he said. "But I figured out how to keep doing it on purpose once it started." Wade stood in the doorway and looked at the small orbital system that his kid had apparently invented out of boredom. "Is any of that the ketchup from the ceiling?" Harry looked up at the rotating objects. "Maybe." "Put it down carefully." "Which thing, specifically?" "Start with the scissors." He put them down carefully. "All of it, actually." He set each thing back with a focused deliberateness that suggested he'd already thought through the order of operations before Wade had asked. "The ketchup he put in the bin." "On his own." "All right," Wade said. He put his bags down. He came and sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor across from Harry, which meant they were eye level, which was the rule. "Tell me what it felt like." And Harry told him. In the same way he always described the door in his head, precise, curious, unafraid. Like someone cataloging a new room rather than being lost in one. Like someone who'd been given, early and completely, the most important tool anyone could have against fear, a father who treated every new scary thing as a problem worth understanding. That night, after Harry was asleep, Wade sat on the fire escape with a beer and looked at the Brooklyn skyline and thought about the wizarding world and what it wanted from his kid, and what his kid was going to do to it when it finally came knocking. He smiled, which he didn't do alone very often. "You have no idea," he told the skyline, which represented, in his mind, the bearded men and the grand plans and the ancient prophecies and everyone who decided, without asking, what Harry Potter was for. "You have absolutely no idea what you're walking into." He told Harry about the fourth wall when Harry was 9. This was, even by Wade's standards, a complicated conversation. "So," Harry said slowly, sitting on the couch with his knees pulled up, the specific posture of someone giving a confusing idea room to settle. "You're saying there's an audience." "Sometimes. It's inconsistent. More like, there's a story. And sometimes I know it's a story, and knowing that means I can see the edges of it. The shape of it. And you think my life was, Wade corrected. Was a story. With a very specific shape that someone had planned out very carefully without consulting you." He paused. The shape involved a lot of suffering and very little choice. Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside, rain had started, hitting the window with the specific persistence of Brooklyn rain in October. "But you changed the shape," Harry said. "Kid, I picked you up off a doorstep. I have no idea if I changed anything or if this was always going to happen and the original shape was wrong. I genuinely don't know how this works. I just know that when I see the machinery of a bad story running, I talk to it." He shrugged. "Sometimes it listens." Harry thought about this with extraordinary seriousness. "Can I talk to it?" "Probably. You've got," Wade tapped his own temple. "You've got a connection I don't have. To something bigger. The door. The door." Another silence. Harry's foot had started tapping, the way it always did when he was working something out. Fast, rhythmic, unconscious. "What was the story supposed to do with me?" he asked. Wade looked at his son. At this kid who ate cereal without looking up from books, who practiced combat sequences in his sleep until Wade would find him sitting up at 3 a.m. running footwork drills on his mattress, who had at some point in the last year quietly started doing other people's homework in exchange for not having to talk to anyone he didn't want to talk to, who had his mother's eyes and his father's, his real father's, apparent inability to fear anything that came at him directly. "It was supposed to make you a weapon," Wade said. "Shaped by loss and forged by other people's plans." Harry's foot stopped tapping. "Instead," Wade said, "you're just you. Which is considerably more dangerous." Harry thought about that for a long moment. Then he uncurled from the couch, dropped his feet on the floor, and said, "Can we have tacos?" "Obviously," Wade said. "I'm not a monster." The year before Hogwarts, Wade started telling Harry everything. Not slowly, not carefully parceled out in age-appropriate increments, everything, all at once, the way he'd always operated, because Harry was 10 years old and in approximately 12 months someone was going to hand him a ticket into a world that had been building to use him for a decade, and Wade would be damned if his kid walked into that blind. They sat at the kitchen table with the books Wade had collected over the years, texts from the magical world, acquired through methods that were creative if not strictly legal, and Wade talked and Harry read and they argued about things like whether Dumbledore was a genius or a chess player who'd mistaken his pieces for volunteers, whether a prophecy was a prediction or a blueprint, whether the Philosopher's Stone being at a school full of children was the dumbest security measure in recorded history or if there was a purpose to it that they were missing. "There's a purpose," Harry said one evening, surrounded by books and takeout containers, not looking up. He had his father's scar-marked forehead bent over a page about old magic and blood protection. "He wants me to find it. He wants me to go after it." "Why?" Wade said, "Because he knew the answer and wanted to hear Harry find it. Because finding it means I have to go through whatever's guarding it. And going through whatever's guarding it proves something about me. It's a test." Harry looked up. His green eyes had that particular brightness they got when a puzzle clicked. "He's not protecting the stone from Voldemort. He's using the stone to train me." Wade pointed a chopstick at him. "There it is. Does he know that Voldemort is already in the building? He's Dumbledore. I'd bet on it." Harry was quiet for a moment. "That's pretty cold," he said. "Yep. What are we going to do about it?" Wade put his chopsticks down. He leaned back in his chair and looked at his kid, his extraordinary, specific, irreplaceable kid who had turned out nothing like anyone had planned, and entirely like himself, which was the best possible outcome, and said, "We're going to let the year happen. Because you need to learn the world before we can change it. But we're going in with our eyes open, and we're going in knowing that Dumbledore is not your ally. He thinks he is. He's not. And Voldemort is a problem we handle when it becomes a problem. Not before." Harry nodded slowly. Then something crossed his face, not worry, never quite worry, more like the preparatory focus of someone checking their equipment before a climb. "What about the other kids?" Wade raised an eyebrow. There are going to be 11-year-olds there who don't know any of this. Who are just kids. Who think it's a school. Harry's voice was measured, but something underneath it was serious in a way that went deeper than tactics. If Dumbledore is running the whole school like a chess game, then everyone there is a piece, not just me. Wade looked at him for a long moment. Yeah, he said quietly. You're right. They are. So we can't just look out for ourselves. No. Probably not. Harry absorbed this. Nodded. Picked up his chopsticks again. Okay, he said. I can work with that. Wade thought about a 3-year-old asleep on a cold stone step, one fist wrapped around a blanket, nobody coming. He thought about the story that had been planned out, the suffering that had been considered acceptable, the weapon that had been intended. He thought about what had happened instead. You know, he said, for a kid who never asked for any of this, you're handling it pretty well. Harry looked up. The grin he gave Wade was so completely, recognizably his own, not James Potter's, not Lily's, not anyone's but the person he'd become, that it knocked something sideways in Wade's chest. I had good training, Harry said. Wade pointed the chopstick at him again. Don't get sappy on me. You literally teared up at the end of Mulan last week. That was allergies. You don't have allergies. You can't. You've tested it. I can have emotional allergies. That's not I can have whatever I want, I'm the dad. Harry laughed, a real one, full and easy, and went back to his books. The rain had stopped. The apartment smelled like takeout and old paper and the specific comfortable warmth of a place that two people had lived in long enough to make entirely theirs. On the wall above the TV there was a framed photo, Wade in the mask, Harry about age 5, both making finger guns at the camera because Harry had insisted and Wade had been unable to argue with the logic that matching poses were cooler. The clock on the wall read 10:47 p.m. In 11 months, a letter would arrive by owl. In 11 months, the wizarding world, with all its grandeur and its scheming and its breathless expectations and its decade of careful planning around a boy it had never bothered to meet, was going to open its doors to Harry Potter. Harry Potter, who had spent 8 years learning everything they'd hoped he'd never know. Harry Potter, who was not afraid of anything that came at him directly, because he'd been raised by someone who wasn't afraid of anything at all, and love, it turned out, was the most effective transmission vector for that particular quality. Wade Wilson put his feet up on the kitchen table and looked at the ceiling, at the spot where the ketchup had been, years ago, now just clean paint, and felt, quietly and completely, like someone who had accidentally done the most important thing they'd ever done. Hey, he said. Harry looked up. I'm glad I found you. Harry held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through his face that was too old for 10 years old and too warm for the conversation they'd just been having about prophecies and chess pieces and the cold arithmetic of sacrifice. I'm glad too, he said. And then, because he was unmistakably his father's son, now can we order more dumplings or are we doing the thing where you pretend we have a bedtime? We have a bedtime. No we don't. We have a conceptual bedtime. That's not, I can have whatever I want, Wade said, already reaching for his phone. I'm the dad. Harry grinned, and picked up his book, and outside the Brooklyn Night went on being the Brooklyn Night, completely unaware that somewhere in it a boy was reading about a world that had no idea what was coming. Chapter 2, You've Got Mail, it's covered in owl poop. The owl arrived on a Tuesday, which Wade had always considered the least trustworthy day of the week. It came through the kitchen window that Harry had left cracked open. He did this every morning, had been doing it for months without explaining why, and Wade had filed it under things Harry knows that I don't yet and left it alone. The owl was enormous, tawny, and carrying a letter with the kind of pompous self-importance that only came from institutions that had never once considered that the world might not be waiting for them. Harry was eating toast. He watched the owl land on the kitchen table, deposit the letter, eat a corner of his toast without asking, and then stare at him with the accusatory intensity of a postal worker who has been delivering to this address for years and is tired of the nonsense. Morning, Harry said to the owl. The owl blinked once. This appeared to satisfy it. Wade came out of his bedroom in sweatpants and a t-shirt that said "I'd rather be dead," which had been a gift from Weasel and was funny if you knew the context and alarming if you didn't, saw the owl, saw the letter, and stopped in the doorway with his coffee cup halfway to his face. "It's happening," he said. "Yep," Harry said. He hadn't picked the letter up yet. He was looking at it the way he looked at everything new, measuring it, not from fear, but from the same habit of assessment that Wade had spent 3 years quietly building into him. Then he picked it up, turned it over, looked at the wax seal with the Hogwarts crest. "Fancy," he said, in a tone that suggested he found this mildly excessive. He broke the seal and read. Wade came and leaned against the counter and drank his coffee and watched Harry read, because he had learned years ago that the most information you got from a person was in the 2 seconds after their face finished processing something and before they decided what expression to put on. Harry's face, in those 2 seconds, did something interesting. Not surprise, he'd known this was coming, they both had. Not anxiety. More like the specific, private satisfaction of someone watching a mechanism they've been studying for months finally switch on. Like the universe had just confirmed something Harry had already suspected. He set the letter down and looked at Wade. "They spelled my name right," he said. "Which means someone went looking." "Yep. And the address is just the kitchen table, apartment 4B, Brooklyn. The letters find you. That's the magic. They don't need an address." Wade paused. "Well. They need some address. Yours is apparently more accurate than most." Harry looked at the envelope. "Mr. H. Potter, the kitchen table, apartment 4B, Brooklyn, New York, United States of America." He turned it over again. "There's something slightly unnerving about an institution that knows exactly where you're sitting. The wizarding world has been watching you since you were born, kid. That's not new information." "I know. Still unnerving." But he wasn't actually unnerved, the way his voice carried it, it was the tone of someone noting an objective fact about the weather. He looked up. "When do we go?" "Diagon Alley's in London." "When do we go to London?" Wade finished his coffee. Put the mug down. Looked at his son, who was sitting at the kitchen table in a Deadpool t-shirt that Harry had commissioned himself at age 8 on the grounds that if you're going to be publicly weird about it I should at least have merch, eating toast with an owl on the table, about to walk into the world that had been circling him like a moon for 10 years. "Pack light," Wade said. "And bring the good shoes." "Define good." "Ones you can run in." Harry stood up, already moving toward his room. "That's all my shoes." "Then we're all set." The owl, apparently satisfied that its job was done, stole the rest of Harry's toast and left out the window. They flew to London that week on a flight that Wade spent watching the other passengers with the practiced assessment of a man who had been on too many flights where something went wrong, and Harry spent reading every magical text they owned for the 3rd time through, making notes in the margins in a handwriting that had somehow become precise and clear over the years despite Wade's own handwriting looking like a seismograph during an earthquake. They landed at Heathrow at 6 in the morning, cleared customs on documentation that was perfectly legal because Wade had insisted on acquiring legal documentation years ago on the grounds that running from Interpol while also managing a child was logistically complicated, and took a cab into London proper. Harry watched London go past the cab window with the attentive, cataloging focus he brought to new environments. He'd been to a lot of cities, Wade's work had taken them places over the years, and Wade had always brought Harry if there was no compelling safety reason not to, because he'd decided early on that knowing the world was better protection than hiding from it. But London had something specific in its early morning light, something layered and old in the way its stones sat, and Harry was quiet in the particular way he got when he was absorbing something. "First impression?" Wade said. "Old," Harry said. "And proud of it." He paused. "Which could mean it's powerful, or it could mean it's fragile. Old things that are proud of being old usually stop changing at some point." Wade looked at the side of his son's face. "You're going to either love or hate the wizarding world," he said. Probably both at the same time. That's generally the healthy response to complicated things. Harry pulled his gaze from the window and looked at Wade with something that was fond and serious at the same time. You nervous? Wade thought about lying and decided it wasn't worth the effort. A little. Not for you. He paused, finding the word, for how they're going to look at you. I've spent 8 years making sure you know who you are, and then in about 6 hours you're going to walk into a room full of people who think they already know who you are. And that's a specific kind of annoying. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, it'll be fine. Yeah. If they try to make me into something I'm not, I'll just, he made a small, casual gesture with one hand, and every object in the cab shifted precisely 2 inches to the left and back again without touching anything, without any fuss, just a demonstration of the same easy control he'd been building for 3 years. I'll just keep being me. The cab driver, who had been very carefully not looking at them for the last 10 minutes, cleared his throat and said nothing. Good policy, Wade said. The leaky cauldron smelled like something between a very old pub and a room that had been soaking in magical residue for approximately 3 centuries, which was accurate. It was dark inside despite the morning, and the moment they stepped through the door from the Muggle Street, the whole atmosphere shifted, thicker somehow, more textured, like stepping from a photograph into the actual room it had been taken in. Harry stopped just inside the door and breathed it in. Wade did not stop, because he'd made a lifelong habit of never being the guy who stopped moving in a new room. He went straight to the bar, sat down, and said, "What's good?" to the bartender, Tom, who was looking at Harry with an expression that was moving rapidly from recognition to awe to something approaching reverence. Tom started. Harry, Wade said. His name is Harry. He's 11. He'd like a butterbeer, I'd like whatever you have that's closest to coffee, and neither of us needs the other thing you're doing with your face right now. Tom closed his mouth. He got the drinks. Harry came and sat next to Wade and looked around the pub with the unhurried attention of someone on a tourist visit to a place they've read about. The few wizards and witches who were there at this early hour were already looking at him, at the scar, visible above the collar of his jacket, at the eyes, at the specific combination of features that apparently spelled Potter to anyone who'd known his parents. Harry looked back at each of them with the same easy, direct gaze, not hostile, not welcoming, just present. A witch at a corner table whispered to her companion. The companion turned around and looked. Harry looked at the companion. The companion turned back around quickly. They all know, Harry said quietly, not particularly bothered about it. They've been waiting for you for 10 years, Wade said. You're basically a celebrity. That's weird. Extremely. Harry picked up his butterbeer. Tried it. His face went through several rapid expressions. This is surprisingly good, he said, with the tone of someone who'd been prepared to be disappointed. Butterbeer's solid. I'll give them that. They sat for a few minutes and Wade let the room look. It was deliberate, letting a room look meant you'd catalog the room before it finished cataloging you, and that was always the better position to be in. He watched the witch who'd whispered lean over to Tom at the bar, and Tom shake his head, and the witch look back at Harry with even more bafflement than before, as if whatever she'd expected wasn't sitting here drinking butterbeer in a Deadpool t-shirt and looking absolutely unbothered. Okay, Harry said eventually. Can we go find the alley? I want to see the wand shop. Yeah, Wade said. He left money on the bar, Muggle money, because he hadn't sorted the exchange yet, which Tom accepted without comment in the spirit of a man who'd decided that this particular visit was operating under its own rules. Let's go find the alley. Diagon Alley was the kind of place that didn't announce itself. One moment there was a brick wall, and then Harry tapped the right brick. He'd read exactly which one, counted precisely, tapped once with the easy confidence of someone executing a known procedure, and the wall folded itself open like a stone curtain pulled back by invisible hands. Wade went through first. Habit. Harry followed. And then he stopped. The alley spread out in front of them in the mid-morning light, cobblestones, and crooked buildings and shop signs that moved and lights that existed independent of any visible source and people in robes moving with the particular purposefulness of a community that considered this normal. Owls in cages outside the post office. A cart stacked improbably high with cauldrons going past at a pace that suggested the cauldrons themselves were providing some of the momentum. A broom in the window of Quality Quidditch Supplies doing a slow, exhibitory rotation. The smell of ink and old wood and something sweet that might have been caramel or might have been a potion ingredient. Harry stood at the entrance and looked down the length of it and was, for approximately 4 seconds, completely quiet. Wade watched him. Then Harry said, "Right. Okay. This is real," and his voice had something in it that was younger than he usually let himself sound. Not afraid, just genuinely affected, the kind of wonder that crept through even the most offended people when the world turned out to be larger than expected. He wasn't performing the reaction. He was having it. Wade put a hand on the back of his neck, briefly, the way he'd done since Harry was small, not a grab, just a point of contact, something that said "I'm here" without requiring words. Harry leaned into it for exactly 1 second and then straightened up. "Gringotts first," Harry said, "back to business. We need to sort the vault. And then books. Then robes. Then the wand. Books first because I want to actually know what I'm buying before I have to buy it." Wade had learned not to argue with this logic. "Lead the way." Harry led the way. And the alley, whether it knew it or not, was watching. Gringotts was everything the books had said and several things they hadn't mentioned, including the smell, which was stone and gold and the particular cold of deep underground places. The goblins looked at Harry with the same assessment Harry applied to everything, which meant they got on reasonably well. Goblins did not seem to deal in reverence, and Harry was not dealing in it either. "Potter Vault," Harry said to the goblin at the nearest window. Then, because he'd read enough to know, we'd also like to discuss the secondary vault. The trust vault and the main vault. The goblin's eyes went slightly sharper. "You are aware of the main vault?" "I'm aware of a lot of things," Harry said pleasantly. "That's sort of the running theme of my morning." Wade was 3 steps behind him and kept his face carefully neutral and his hands visible, because Gringotts had security that even he respected, and this was Harry's show. The goblin, Griphook, whose name Harry had used without prompting, which caused something to move through the goblin's expression, processed the paperwork with a speed that suggested he was either impressed or alarmed or had simply decided to move quickly before anything else unexpected happened. They went down in the cart. Harry watched the tunnels go past with the same cataloging attention he gave everything new. He did not hold the rail, which Wade noticed and respected. The Potter Vault was substantial in the quiet way that old money was substantial, not ostentatious, just deeply present. Stacks of gold galleons that had been accumulating interest since before Harry's parents were born. Some personal items in a locked secondary chest that Griphook indicated came with Harry's legal inheritance at age 11. Harry looked at the money with the same expression he'd looked at the alley with, genuine, unperformed reaction, working through something. Then he picked up a galleon, turned it over, and set it back down. "How much," he said to Griphook, "would it cost to arrange independent management of the main vault? Not just the trust fund. Full management." Griphook looked at him. "That would require a formal request, documentation of guardianship, and a fee of approximately 50 galleons for the administrative transfer, yes." Harry met the goblin's gaze. "I've done the reading." Another silence. Then Griphook did something that might, in a goblin, have constituted a smile, the faintest reconfiguration of a face not built for warmth. "We can arrange that," he said. They left Gringotts an hour later with Harry's financial affairs substantially more organized than Dumbledore had likely intended them to be, which was, in Wade's assessment, an extremely good start to the day. Flourish and blots was the best hour of Harry's morning. He moved through it with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he needed and approximately where to find it, and the specific additional intensity of someone who kept finding things he hadn't known he needed. He got the school books. He got 3 supplementary texts on magical theory that weren't on any list. He got a copy of Hogwarts, a history that he'd already read 3 times but wanted his own copy of. He got a slim volume on ancient runic magic that caught his eye on a high shelf and that he was reading standing in the aisle before he'd registered reaching for it. Wade bought a book called So Your Child is a Wizard, a non-magical parent's complete guide, mostly out of spite, because the chapter titles were phenomenal. Chapter 7 is literally called Managing Your Expectations, he told Harry. Is it good advice? Wade flipped to it. Read for 30 seconds. Actually, yes, it's quite good. The author has clearly dealt with some nonsense in their time. He put it in the pile. The woman behind the counter, older, with reading glasses on a chain and the specific authority of someone who has managed a bookshop long enough to have opinions about everyone who comes in, had been watching Harry since they walked in. Not with the reverence the pub had offered. With something more like calculation. Potter, she said when they brought the pile to the counter. That's me, Harry said. Your mother used to come in here. Something shifted in Harry's face, not pain, exactly, something quieter than that, the specific texture of loss for people you didn't get to remember. He'd always handled this the same way, he acknowledged it, he carried it, he moved. What did she buy? He asked. The woman, her name tag said Heloise, looked at him for a moment. Spell theory, mostly. Advanced work. She was a remarkable witch. She paused. You have her eyes. I know, Harry said. People keep mentioning it. Not unkindly, just factually. Did she have a favorite section? Heloise pointed to the back left of the shop, where the theory and advanced magical study texts were kept. Harry looked at it for a moment. Then he nodded, once, and turned back to the counter. I'll probably be back, he said. I have a feeling this school's curriculum is going to leave some gaps. Heloise looked at him the way people sometimes looked at Harry, with the expression of someone revising an assumption they hadn't realized they'd made. I'll keep an eye out, she said, and there was something in it that was more like respect than awe, which was, in Wade's experience, considerably harder to earn. Outside, Wade bumped Harry's shoulder with his. Harry bumped back, not looking at him, already reading the ancient runes book while walking. Watch where you're going, Wade said. I'm watching, Harry said, and used a flick of wandless magic to steer himself around a witch coming the other direction without looking up. Wade thought, not for the first time, God help this school. Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions was where things got interesting. They were mid-fitting, Harry on a step stool while a measuring tape moved itself around him with the industrious attention of a very dedicated assistant, robes being draped and pinned with practiced efficiency, when the door opened and 2 people came in. A woman first, all angles and expensive fabric and the particular posture of someone who'd been told they were important for so long it had become structural. And then a boy. Blonde. Pale. The kind of good-looking that could go either way depending on what the inside turned out to be like. The robes he was being fitted into were the finest in the shop, and he was wearing the knowledge of this with the ease of someone who'd never thought to question it. His eyes moved to Harry the way rich kids' eyes moved to anyone who wasn't immediately identifiable as their social equivalent, a quick scan, a rapid assessment, a landing on the scar. Hogwarts. The boy said, to Harry directly, with the crisp vowels of someone who'd grown up learning that social introduction was a performance to be executed correctly. Harry looked at him from the step stool with the even, assessing gaze that made adults uncomfortable and seemed to have no particular effect on him. That's the plan, he said. Draco Malfoy. The boy said it the way people said names they expected to be recognized. Harry Potter, Harry said, with none of the weight Draco had put into his own name. Just information. Draco's face did something quick and complicated, surprised that he didn't fully manage to suppress, the name landing differently than he'd expected, the scar confirming it. Then he regrouped with impressive speed. I've heard about you, he said. I'd imagine so, Harry said. Have you heard anything accurate? A beat. I heard you disappeared. I was in Brooklyn. It's not that dramatic. Draco looked at Wade, who was sitting in one of Madame Malkin's chairs with his arms crossed, watching this exchange with the professional interest of someone evaluating a performance. Wade raised a hand. Hey. Draco turned back to Harry. He was recalibrating. Harry could see it, the social script he'd walked in with was not matching the conversation he was having, and a boy who'd been carefully prepared for a specific version of this encounter was now improvising. Are you Muggle-raised? He asked, and there was enough in the tone to indicate what he thought of that. Harry thought about 8 years of training, about tacos at midnight, about the kitchen table where he'd learned everything they'd hoped he wouldn't know, about the orbit of loose objects and the door in his head and the specific quality of being raised by someone who'd never let him be small. I was raised by the best person I know, Harry said, pleasantly and with complete finality, in the tone of someone closing a door that wasn't rude enough to slam. Draco looked at him for another moment. His mother, behind him, had gone very still. Wade, in the chair, had a small smile going that he wasn't quite suppressing. I could help you, Draco said. He'd shifted strategies, older than 11, that move, or coached into it, the offer of alliance positioned as generosity. At Hogwarts. There are right people to know and wrong people to know. I could show you the difference. Harry looked at him with the same even directness. He wasn't dismissing Draco, he was actually looking at him, in the way he looked at all people, the way Wade had taught, reading the tells. What he saw was a kid who'd been handed a script by adults and was delivering it because that was what he'd been told success looked like. The arrogance was real, but it was also, under close examination, performance. And under the performance there was something younger and considerably less certain. I think, Harry said, I'll probably figure out the right people on my own. He held Draco's gaze for a moment, then turned back to Madame Malkin's assistant and the measuring tape, with the serene lack of drama of someone who has simply moved on. Draco stood there for exactly 2 seconds, and then his mother's hand found his shoulder, and they moved to the other side of the shop. Wade watched the mother's face, Narcissa Malfoy, and you could practically read the Malfoy in the structure of her, and saw something move through it that wasn't quite what he'd expected. Not anger. More like the look of someone who had just watched a very small variable enter a very large equation and was already trying to calculate the impact. Wade approved of her, cautiously, for being smart enough to notice. When they left the shop later, robes boxed and over Wade's arm, Harry was quiet for half a block. He's not a bad kid, Harry said eventually. No. He's been taught to be a particular kind of person. That's different. Harry was thinking out loud, the way he did when he was processing something morally. What he is isn't set yet. He just thinks it is. Wade looked at the side of his son's face. How do you know? The way he regrouped when his script didn't work. A bad person would have just doubled down. He adjusted. Harry shrugged. That means he can think. Thinking means there's somewhere to go. They walked for another half block. The alley moved around them, magical and old and busy with its own concerns. You're going to end up collecting strays, Wade said. Takes one to know one, Harry said, and glanced at him sidelong with a grin, and Wade made a noise that was definitely not a laugh. Ollivander's was last, because Harry had wanted it last. Some things, he'd told Wade over breakfast on the plane, should be waited for. Some things you earned the arrival of. The shop was narrow and dim and smelled powerfully of wood shavings and something older than wood shavings, and Mr. Ollivander was exactly what the books had suggested, a man so thoroughly defined by his craft that the distinction between him and it had become academic. His pale eyes moved to Harry immediately and stayed there with an attention that was professional and something more. Harry Potter, he said, softly, the way people said it when they meant it as a weight rather than a name. Mr. Ollivander, Harry said. He looked around the shop with genuine interest, at the towers of long narrow boxes, at the single one displayed in the window, at the layers of craft and history compressed into the small space. This is impressive. Ollivander blinked. This was apparently not how people opened the conversation. Thank you, he said, after a moment. How many wands have you made? Many thousands. Do you remember them all? Every single one. No hesitation. Harry looked at him with the appreciation of someone recognizing a genuine thing. That's extraordinary. You remember every wand, but the wand chooses the wizard. So you're essentially building keys without knowing which locks they'll open, and you have to hold all of them in mind at once. Ollivander looked at Harry with the expression of a man encountering an 11-year-old who had said something he needed a moment to process. That, he said slowly, is an interesting way to describe it. Is it accurate? Reasonably. He recovered himself, not from being knocked off balance, but from the recalibration that Harry seemed to produce in people by simply being attentive. Let's find yours. The fitting went longer than either of them had expected. Not because Harry was difficult, he wasn't, he was precise and patient and gave clear feedback each time a wand produced nothing or produced something partial and insufficient. But the wands kept trying things that weren't quite right, and Ollivander kept going further back into the stacks, and the pile of tested wands grew, and Wade sat in the single available chair and watched with the carefully managed tension of a man who knows something significant is happening. Harry didn't seem anxious about the length of the search. He held each wand the same way, fully, attentively, with the same quality of presence he brought to everything, and when they didn't work, he set them down with the care of someone returning something borrowed. At the 37th wand, Ollivander had been counting, Wade could tell, with the mounting engagement of a craftsman encountering a problem that interested him. The old wand maker paused before he brought it out. He looked at Harry from across the shop. Curious, he said. Very curious. What is? Harry asked. The wand that will choose you. I wonder. He stopped. Went to the back. Came back with a box that was dustier than the others, as if it had been waiting longer. Holly and phoenix feather. 11 inches. Supple. He paused before offering it. I remember making this one particularly well. Its brother gave you that scar. There was a silence in the shop that had weight to it. Harry looked at the box. Then at Ollivander. Does that mean I shouldn't use it? It means, Ollivander said carefully, that the connection between you and the wand whose brother gave you that scar is unusual. Ancient. It will mean something, down the road. I know what it means, Harry said. I've read about priori incantatem. He looked at the box again. Can I try it? Ollivander extended it. Harry picked up the wand. The warmth came up his arm immediately, he could feel it, and Ollivander and Wade could see it in his face, the shift from patient assessment to something that was recognition, deep and certain as a bell being struck. Gold and red sparks scattered from the tip in a fountain that lasted 3 seconds and then resolved into a clean, contained stillness. The quality of the air in the shop changed, the way air changed before a storm, briefly and significantly. Harry looked at the wand in his hand. His expression was something Wade had almost never seen on him, not wonder, not satisfaction, not the cool competence he usually operated from. It was something quieter and more personal than all of those. Something like being met. Yes, Ollivander breathed. That will do. Capable of great things. But so, he looked at Harry with eyes that were very old and very clear. Are you, I think. Capable of great things can mean a lot of different things, Harry said, and looked up from the wand to Ollivander's face, and something passed between them that was respectful and honest and had none of the theatrical weight that the wand maker usually put on this moment. Just two people acknowledging a real thing. Yes, Ollivander said again, more quietly. It can. Wade bought the wand, paid for it, and they went back out into the alley. Harry walked with the wand box under his arm, turning the weight of it over in his hand without opening it, just carrying it. They were almost to the entrance back to the leaky cauldron when Harry said, without preamble, he didn't expect me to know about priori incantatem. No. Dumbledore knew I'd be coming here. He could have told Ollivander to be careful about what he said. Harry turned this over. He didn't. Which means either he didn't think of it, Wade said, or he wanted you to know about the connection. Harry's jaw set slightly. Not angrily, just with the particular firmness of someone adding a piece to an already complex picture and not loving where it fit. He wants me to know about the connection because knowing about it makes it feel more significant. More fated. He glanced at Wade. More like something I have to follow through on. Yep. He's been setting the stage for a long time. Yep. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, does it work on people who already know they're on a stage? Wade looked at him sideways. That, he said, is the most important question you've ever asked. Harry thought about it for another step or two. Then he said, good, in the tone of someone who has received an answer they already suspected and is pleased to have it confirmed. They had dinner that evening at a small restaurant in Muggle London that Wade had looked up on his phone like a normal person, which seemed to be a concept the day had made feel increasingly radical. Harry ate with the focused energy of someone whose mind was still running through the day even while the rest of him was occupied with pasta, which Wade recognized because he had the same tendency and had apparently transmitted it successfully. What's the most important thing you noticed today? Wade said. It was a game they'd been playing since Harry was 6, debrief as conversation, assessment dressed as discussion. Harry chewed, thought. The way the alley feels like it's sealed off, he said. Everyone there is only there. They don't look out. The Muggle street on either side of the leaky cauldron, they don't think about it. It's not that they can't access it. They just don't feel the need. He paused. That's a choice, but it's become a habit, and habits that feel like choices are how you end up trapped without knowing it. Wade nodded. Second most important thing, Harry said, is that everyone recognized me but nobody knew me. They recognized the scar and the name and this. He touched his hair, which was still doing its own thing as aggressively as it always had, but when I talked, they were surprised. Every single person was surprised. He looked at Wade. They had a version of me already. 10 years old and they had a whole story about who I was and they were meeting it instead of me. How did that feel? Harry considered this honestly. Useful, he said. If they've already decided who I am, then who I actually am is a surprise I get to deploy at a time of my choosing. Wade pointed his fork at him. That is an exceptional piece of thinking. I learned from the best. You did, didn't you? Wade said, without any modesty, because false modesty had always seemed to him like lying about something true. You really did. Harry smiled, the private one, the one without performance, and went back to his pasta. Outside, London was doing what London did in the late evening, which was exist with considerable confidence in its own existence. Inside, a boy who had spent 10 years becoming exactly who he chose to be was eating dinner and thinking about a school full of people who thought they already knew him, and there was something in his eyes that was warm and ready and entirely, absolutely unafraid. Wade looked at him and thought, not for the first time, they have no idea. He picked up his drink. To Hogwarts, he said. Harry picked up his water glass. Held it up. To their complete unpreparedness, he said, and they clinked glasses with the cheerful sincerity of people who have absolutely earned a toast. Chapter 3, Platform 9 3/4 of a problem. King's Cross was a Tuesday kind of place even on a Saturday, noise and pigeons and people moving with the compressed urgency of people who had trains to catch and no time to be interesting about it. Wade moved through it the way he moved through everywhere, which was with the general posture of someone who owned whatever room they were in and was merely allowing others to share it. Harry moved through it reading. He'd been reading since breakfast and showed no signs of stopping, the Ancient Runes book open in one hand while he navigated the crowd with the wandless spatial awareness he'd been quietly developing for 3 years, stepping around luggage carts and slow-moving families without looking up once. You're going to walk into a pillar, Wade said. I won't, Harry said. The specific pillar I'm thinking of is between platforms 9 and 10. Harry looked up. Looked at the pillar. Looked back at his book and kept walking. I'll step through it before I walk into it. Wade paused. That's technically correct. Okay. The trolley loaded with Harry's trunk and Hedwig's cage. Hedwig was a snowy owl they'd acquired 2 days ago from Elop's in Diagon Alley, and she had already developed opinions about Wade, rattled along beside them with the cheerful instability of a thing with one slightly misaligned wheel. Harry had named her himself, from the books, and Hedwig had accepted the name with the regal disinterest of an owl who had decided her human was adequate. They stopped in front of the barrier. Around them, King's Cross moved and breathed and paid them no attention. A family went past, red hair, impossible number of children, a mother saying something about jumpers, and Wade clocked them immediately. Weasleys, Harry said, without looking up. You saw them? Heard them? The youngest boy is complaining about his wand being second-hand. The twins are arguing about whether you can transfigure a flobberworm into something useful. He finally looked up from his book. Watched the family at the barrier. They seem loud. Most good families are. Harry watched the red-haired family for a moment with an expression that was interested in something else, something more careful that he didn't name out loud. Then he looked at Wade, and something in the look said this is it without saying it, and Wade put his hand on the back of Harry's neck the way he always did, the brief solid point of contact that meant I'm here. So, Wade said. So, Harry said. Rules. Harry recited them with the resigned patience of someone who has heard them recently and accepts the repetition as a feature rather than a bug. Don't let them make me small. Don't hide what I can do to make other people comfortable. Don't trust authority by default, earn it or don't get it. Don't start fights but finish them. Come home at Christmas. And if something tries to kill me, kill it back. Good. Wade dropped his hand. You've got Hedwig if you need to reach me. I'll be in the city. Weasel says hi, by the way. He also says, do not repeat whatever Weasel said. He made you a very thoughtful card. His cards always have something terrible in them. It has a drawing of a chimichanga on the front. Harry's mouth twitched. Okay, that's actually nice. Inside it says don't die, you're the only one who laughs at my jokes. Harry stood there for a moment. I'm going to miss you, he said, in the tone of someone stating a fact rather than seeking a response. Wade looked at him. At this 11-year-old in jeans and a plain grey jacket with his catastrophic hair doing its own sovereign thing and his ancient runes book tucked under his arm and his owl glaring at Wade from her cage with a professional-grade disapproval that she had clearly adopted from her owner, at this specific, irreplaceable person who had somehow happened. I know, he said. I'm going to miss you too. Don't, he stopped. Start it again. Don't be someone you're not for anyone in there. You've spent 11 years figuring out who you are. That's not nothing. That's the whole thing. Harry nodded once, the serious nod, the one that meant received and understood. Also, Wade added, the sorting hat is a 1,000-year-old hat that will try to talk to you about your future. It's basically a metaphor for everyone who thinks they know what's best for you, except at least the hat is honest about being an object. I'm aware. Just don't let it sort you into anything you'd have to lie about. I won't. Wade looked at him for one more second. Then he jerked his chin at the barrier. Go on. Platform 9 3/4 is waiting and the train leaves at 11. Harry picked up Hedwig's cage. Turned to the barrier. And then, without breaking stride, without hesitation, without a single moment of the trembling uncertainty that the moment might have called for in someone else, walked through the wall like it was a door he'd been using for years. Wade stood on the King's Cross side of the barrier and looked at the spot where his kid had been. A passing businessman gave him a wide berth. This was probably the mask. He'd forgotten he was wearing it. He'd been doing some light surveillance this morning as a professional warm-up exercise and had simply not taken it off. He stood there for another moment, in the middle of King's Cross Station, hands in his pockets, feeling a thing he had no intention of naming out loud. Then he said, to no one in particular, he's going to be absolutely fine. The universe did not respond, which Wade chose to interpret as agreement. The Hogwarts Express was red and enormous, and the platform smelled of steam and family goodbyes and something specifically magical that Harry couldn't name but logged anyway, the way he logged things that might matter later. The platform was packed, students and parents and owls and cats and someone's toad that was making an escape attempt with considerable commitment, and the noise of it was a specific kind of cheerful chaos that felt, if not comfortable, at least honest. Harry loaded his trunk into a compartment near the back of the train, settled Hedwig's cage on the rack, and took a seat by the window. He opened his book. He was, at this point, simply waiting. He didn't wait long. The compartment door slid open and a boy looked in, red hair, freckles, a smudge of something on his nose that was probably deliberate in origin and had simply survived to this point by momentum. He was looking for somewhere to sit with the particular expression of someone who has exhausted the obvious options. "Is it all right if he started. "Sure," Harry said, without looking up. The boy came in, hauled a trunk onto the rack with some effort, and dropped into the seat across from Harry with a relieved exhale. There was a moment of comfortable quiet. Harry kept reading. The boy, who was clearly a Weasley by hair and coloring and the general energy of someone who had grown up in a house full of people and therefore had no anxiety about existing in shared space, looked around the compartment with the easy assessment of someone checking the room out of habit. "I'm Ron," the boy said eventually. "Ron Weasley." Harry looked up. "Harry Potter." Ron processed this with a speed that suggested he'd already half suspected it. His eyes went to the scar, then immediately back to Harry's face with the deliberate politeness of someone who had been told, probably by his mother, not to stare. "Right," he said. "Brilliant. Is it?" "Well, yeah. I mean, everyone's heard of," he stopped. Reconsidered. "Sorry. You probably get that a lot." "Fairly often," Harry said. "It's fine. I've had 10 years to get used to it." He paused, considering. "Did you ever hear anything specific?" Ron thought about it. "My mum talks about the night it happened sometimes. Says every witch and wizard in Britain felt it." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, in the manner of someone who has decided to commit to a conversation. "What's it like?" "Knowing he searched for a word that wasn't famous. That people already know who you are." Harry looked at him for a moment. Most people, when they asked about his history, were asking because they wanted the story, the drama and the mystery of it, the dark wizard and the baby who survived. Ron was asking what it was like. Which was different. Which was actually a more interesting question. "Useful, mostly," Harry said. "They've already made up their minds about who I am, so whatever I actually am is a surprise I get to decide when to show them." Ron considered this. Then he laughed, a real one, sudden and genuine, the laugh of someone who found something unexpectedly funny. "That's either brilliant or terrifying," he said. "Why not both?" Harry said. Ron grinned. It was an immediate, unguarded grin, the kind that belonged to someone who hadn't yet learned to ration them. "Yeah," he said, "all right." They spent the next hour talking with the easy, testing rhythm of two people discovering whether they're going to like each other, which for both of them seemed to mostly consist of saying things to see if the other person laughed, and mostly the other person did. Ron told Harry about his brothers, Fred and George, who had spent the morning mailing something to their mutual acquaintance Lee Jordan that Ron was morally certain was a prank component, Percy, who had prefect responsibilities and the emotional flexibility of a brick wall, Charlie, who was in Romania doing something impressive with dragons, Bill, who was a cursebreaker at Gringotts. Cursebreaker, Harry said, and his attention sharpened in the specific way it did when something connected to existing knowledge. "At Gringotts?" "Yeah. He's brilliant. Does fieldwork in Egypt mostly." "I actually had some dealings with Gringotts recently," Harry said. "Setting up proper vault management. The security framework they use is fascinating. It's essentially layered ward magic with a goblin-specific authentication system that has no human equivalent." Ron stared at him. "You were doing vault management at 11? Someone has to. Most people just, Ron gestured vaguely, let a grown-up handle it. I have a grown-up, Harry said. He handles the things that need handling. But financial independence is worth establishing early in a world where a lot of people have spent 10 years assuming they had access to my resources. So. He shrugged. Ron opened his mouth, closed it, and then said, with the frank admiration of someone who has decided to just lean in, you're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. More. I expected more. He waved a hand. Tragic orphan energy. Harry offered. Ron pointed at him. Yes. That exactly. I had a fairly excellent childhood, as it turns out. How does that work? I thought you were, no offense, I thought you were with Muggle relatives. I was supposed to be, Harry said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite a smile and not quite the cold weight of a near miss, but somewhere in between. Someone had other ideas. Who? My dad. Ron absorbed this. The train was moving now, London receding behind them, the English countryside beginning to open up outside the window. Your dad found you. Found me on a doorstep and picked me up. Which is technically theft, depending on how you read the relevant statutes, but we've always felt the circumstances made the point moot. Ron thought about this for a moment and then said, very seriously, is he magic? Categorically not. He's something else entirely. Harry paused, considering. He's the person who taught me everything that school can't. Ron didn't push for more, which Harry noted as instinctively good judgment. Instead he said, what house do you think you'll be in? Harry thought about it honestly. I'm not sure the hat will find it straightforward, he said. You. Gryffindor. Obviously. All my family are. If I'm not in Gryffindor my mum will probably, he made a gesture suggesting earthquake-level domestic disturbance. Would it bother you? If you were somewhere else? Ron thought about it with a seriousness that suggested this was not a question he'd been asked before. I don't know, he said. Everyone assumes I'll be Gryffindor because of the family, and then I assume it because everyone assumes it, so at some point I stopped thinking about whether it was actually what I am. He paused. Is that bad? I think it's honest, Harry said. Knowing the difference between what you are and what you've been assumed to be is harder than it sounds. Most people never notice there's a gap. Ron looked at him for a moment. You've thought about this a lot. I've had good reason to. Before Ron could follow this thread, the compartment door opened and a girl put her head in. Bushy brown hair, intent brown eyes, the brisk energy of someone running a self-assigned project. She looked at them both with the rapid assessment of someone who was looking for something specific. Have you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one. No toad in here, Ron said. She started to withdraw, then her eyes snagged on Harry. The same recognition, the same quick drop to the scar and back. But what followed it was different from what Harry had been getting all morning, less reverence, more curiosity. The specific curiosity of someone who had read everything available on a subject and was now looking at the primary source. You're Harry Potter, she said. I am, Harry said. I've read about you. Quite a lot, actually. She said it with the tone of someone presenting a credential rather than offering a compliment. There's not very much factual information, which I found frustrating. Most of it is second-hand accounts and speculation. She paused. I'm Hermione Granger. Harry Potter, Harry said, and then because she'd clearly already processed that, the reading must have been frustrating. I'm probably not what the speculation suggested. I'd gathered that, she said, and something in her tone had shifted, from the controlled neutrality of first assessment to a beginning of something more like genuine engagement. What are you reading? Harry held up the spine. She stepped further into the compartment to read the title, then her eyes went wide. Ancient Runic Magical Theory, Volume 3. That's not on any first-year list. That's advanced study text. I know. Volume 1 and 2 were interesting, but the third is where it gets into practical application, which is the part one actually care about. Hermione looked at him the way she might look at a sum that had come out correctly after several attempts. Then she said, "I've read Volume 1, in the tone of someone accepting a challenge that hasn't been explicitly issued. I'll lend you 2 and 3 when I'm done," Harry said. She stood in the doorway for another moment, running some rapid internal calculation. Then she said, "Thank you," and there was something genuine in it, something less performed than the rest of her presentation had been, and Harry filed it under actually someone worth knowing and went back to his book. She left to find the toad. Ron, who had been watching this exchange with his arms crossed and the expression of someone watching a sport he'd only just learned the rules of, said, "She's a bit intense." "I liked her," Harry said. "Yeah," Ron said, after a second. "Me too, actually." They arrived at Hogsmeade Station in the dark, which was atmospherically committed of the Scottish Highlands. First years were herded toward the boats by a voice that could only belong to Hagrid. Harry recognized the description from everything he'd read, the size and warmth of the man preceding him across the platform. The boats were magic, obviously. The castle across the lake was a thing that had to be seen because no description, not the ones in the books, not the ones he'd built in his own head, had quite prepared him for the specific visual fact of it. Torchlight in windows that went up further than made structural sense. Towers that suggested stories. The whole thing reflected in the black water of the lake in a way that was beautiful and meant to be beautiful, which Harry noticed and held both feelings about simultaneously. Across the boat, Ron was looking at the castle with his mouth slightly open. "Every year," he said, half to himself, "they say it gets you." And it does. "First time?" Harry said. "Obviously. I meant first time feeling it. Some things are always first times even when you already know they're coming." Ron looked at him with the expression Harry was starting to recognize as, "You said something that I need a second to process." "Yeah," he said eventually. "Exactly that." Harry looked at the castle. He felt the door in his head, which had been quieter since they'd entered Scotland, become slightly more active, a faint pressure, a warmth that wasn't entirely his own. Not threatening. More like proximity. He filed that under later and didn't look concerned about it, because he wasn't. The Great Hall was exactly what it was supposed to be, enchanted ceiling, floating candles, for long tables of students turning to watch the first years file in with the collective attention of an audience that had been waiting. Harry walked with Ron and was aware, with the peripheral awareness that 8 years of training had made automatic, of the eyes finding him, of the whisper moving through the hall like a current. "Potter. Is that Potter? Harry Potter." He didn't look for the whispers. He looked at the room. High table, Dumbledore, centered, the beard and the half-moon glasses exactly as described. Blue eyes that found Harry with a precision that confirmed what Harry had already suspected, that Dumbledore had been looking for him since before he walked in the door, had probably been watching him since the leaky cauldron, and was now performing the expression of pleasant surprise. Harry met the blue eyes and held them for exactly 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds communicated, with the serene absence of any particular expression, that he was not surprised by any of this. Dumbledore's expression did something small and complicated that would have been invisible to anyone not specifically watching for it. Harry looked away. To the left of Dumbledore, a man in a turban was watching Harry with the intensity of a fixed point. Purple turban. Dark eyes. Nervous hands. And Harry's scar pulsed once, brief and sharp, the door rattling in its frame. "There you are," Harry thought, calmly, at the presence behind the door, and reached up to touch the scar once, briefly, as if scratching an itch. He turned away from the high table and looked at the sorting hat, because that was the immediate order of business. The hat sang. Harry listened with genuine attention because the song was better than he'd expected, genuinely clever in places, the work of something very old that had spent centuries thinking about the problem of people and categories and had developed correspondingly nuanced opinions. He felt a small approval for the hat before he'd even gotten near it. Names were called alphabetically. Harry watched each sorting with the attentiveness of someone filing information, Lavender Brown to Gryffindor, Hannah Abbott to Hufflepuff, Terry Boot to Ravenclaw. The houses becoming concrete through examples rather than abstractions. Hermione Granger was called, sat under the hat for almost no time at all, and went to Gryffindor with a brightness in her face that was partly satisfaction and partly relief, which Harry understood. Potter, Harry. The whisper that went through the hall was louder this time. Chairs shifted. Heads craned. Harry walked to the stool with the same unhurried stride he used everywhere, sat down, and the hat dropped over his eyes and the world became interior. "Well," said the hat, directly into his mind, in a voice that was old and dry and surprisingly conversational. "This is unusual." Busy day, Harry thought back. "I don't mean the day. I mean you." A pause, the quality of very old attention settling. "You've been prepared." "I've been educated," Harry said. "There's a difference." "Yes," the hat said, with something like approval. "That's precisely the difference I mean." Another pause. "You know about the houses. You've thought about where you'd fit." "I've thought about where I'd be put versus where I'd fit. Those might be different things." "They often are," the hat agreed. "Plenty of courage, remarkable amounts, actually, though yours doesn't come from the source I usually encounter. Most courageous children are afraid of something and push past it. You're not afraid of very much at all. An assessing beat. That's not emptiness. It's the result of work. Someone's work and yours. Yes. There's intelligence. Real intelligence, not just processing speed but actual thinking, the kind that questions its own conclusions." The hat was moving through him with the unhurried thoroughness of something that had done this 10,000 times and still found each case singular. Loyalty. Deep. But not to institutions, to people. Specific, chosen people. That's different from how I usually find it. A pause that felt weighty. And cunning. More than most would expect from looking at you. Not self-serving cunning. Purposeful cunning. Cunning in service of things you've decided matter. Harry waited. "You could go several places," the hat said. "And you'd be remarkable in any of them. But you're asking me where you'd fit, not where you'd be put. So I'll ask you something, where do you want to be?" Harry thought about it honestly. He thought about Ron and the easy, immediate quality of that friendship. He thought about Hermione and the specific pleasure of meeting someone who read like he did and thought like he did and was going to argue with him about it. He thought about the castle and what this year was already shaping up to be. "Somewhere I can do what needs doing," he thought at the hat. "That's not a house, that's a goal," the hat said, drily. "It's both," Harry said. A pause. Then the hat said, with something that might have been amusement, "Fair enough. You'll do well there. Better than well. Though I suspect you'd do well anywhere." And aloud, to the great hall, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table broke into applause. Harry took the hat off, set it on the stool, and walked to the table. Hermione was clapping with the genuine enthusiasm of someone who'd been hoping for this result. Ron, sorted into Gryffindor moments later, dropped into the seat next to Harry with a gust of relief and said, obviously, in a tone that suggested he'd been nervous anyway. Harry looked back at the high table. Dumbledore was smiling, the warm, grandfatherly smile that Harry recognized as a performance of warmth rather than the thing itself. It was a skilled performance. He clapped with the rest of the staff. Beside him, the turbaned professor was still watching Harry with eyes that were too intent and too hungry and too frightened all at once. Harry looked at the turban. Felt the door. Looked away. One thing at a time, he thought, and reached for a chicken leg with the good appetite of someone who'd had a long and productive day. Breakfast the next morning was when Draco Malfoy decided to try again. Harry had been at Hogwarts for approximately 14 hours and had already developed a functional map of the corridors between Gryffindor Tower and the Great Hall, identified 3 professors worth paying attention to, established that the ceiling in the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side was not actually structurally compromised but smelled like something large and animal was nearby, and made it most of the way through his toast before Draco appeared at the end of the Gryffindor table with 2 large boys flanking him and the specific posture of someone who'd rehearsed an entrance. "Potter," Draco said. Loud enough for the surrounding seats to hear. "I wanted to welcome you properly. I don't think we got off on the right foot in Diagon Alley." Ron looked up from his eggs with the expression of someone reading a situation and not liking the conclusion. Hermione put her book down with the careful attention of someone deciding whether to intervene. Harry finished his toast. Set it down. Looked at Draco with the same direct, unhurried gaze from the robes shop. "You extended an offer of help," Harry said. "I appreciated the intention. I declined the specific offer. That seems like a right foot to me." Draco had been prepared for several versions of this conversation. This version was apparently not one of them, because something crossed his face that was the cousin of irritation but wasn't quite it, more like the specific frustration of a chess player whose opening gambit has produced an unexpected response. "The offer still stands," Draco said. "In fact, I'd say it's more relevant now. Hogwarts can be complicated for people who don't understand how it works." "How does it work?" Harry said, genuinely curious. Another beat of recalibration. "Connections matter. Family matters. The right alliances," Draco, Harry said, pleasantly. "I'm going to stop you there, not because I find you annoying, but because I genuinely think the script you've been given isn't accurate and you're smart enough to do better than it." He looked at Draco with the same honest attention he'd given him in the robes shop. "The framework you're describing, alliances based on family, connections based on blood status, I know you believe in it because you've been told to your whole life. But I've been on the outside of your world for 11 years, which means I've looked at it from the angle you can't see from inside, and I'm telling you that framework is load-bearing for people who need it and decorative for everyone else. I don't need it." Draco's face had gone through several things during this. The boys on either side of him, Crabbe and Goyle, by build and description, were looking at Harry with the blank attention of people waiting for instructions. "What you do with that information is up to you," Harry said, and turned back to his breakfast. A silence followed. It had weight to it, the kind of silence that meant everyone nearby had been listening and was now waiting to see how the scene resolved. Draco had several options, all of them visible, and Harry had given him the face-saving one on purpose: walk away having delivered the message, mission notionally accomplished, without having been publicly embarrassed. Draco stood there for 3 seconds. Then he turned and went back to the Slytherin table with his head up, which Harry had also expected, and which was its own kind of answer. Ron let out a breath beside him. "Merlin. How do you do that?" "What?" "That. The thing you just," he gestured. "The whole thing. My dad talks to everyone like they're capable of making a better choice. It rubs off." Hermione had her chin in her hand and was looking at Harry with an expression he was learning to read as "I have questions but I'm going to let the moment settle first." Then she said, "He might not actually change, you know. Malfoy. He might just decide you're an enemy and become worse." "He might," Harry agreed. "But I'd rather find out which one it is by giving him the option than assume the worst and make it a self-fulfilling thing." Hermione considered this. "That's either very wise or naive." "Ask me again at Christmas," Harry said. Ron had gone back to his eggs. "What is it with you and very or either," he said, through a mouthful of scrambled eggs, "you never just pick one." "Things are usually both," Harry said. "That's either very philosophical or very annoying," Ron said, and Harry laughed, and Hermione looked at them both with the fond exasperation of someone who has accidentally joined a club and is not sure yet whether to complain about it. Defense Against the Dark Arts was Professor Quirrell's class, and it was bad. Not dramatically bad. Not obviously bad. But bad in the specific way of a class taught by someone who was performing teaching rather than doing it, the stutter carefully deployed, the nervousness that was real but wrong somehow, pitched at the wrong frequency, like a recording of nervousness rather than the thing itself. Harry sat in the third row and watched Quirrell with the particular quality of attention he gave to things that contained a problem. The turban was still there. Up close the smell was distinctive, garlic, yes, but underneath it something else, something that made Harry's scar sing low and constant like a held note on a string. He didn't reach for the scar. He kept his hands flat on the desk and kept listening and kept watching and said nothing, which for Harry was an act of significant patience. The lesson itself was on defensive theory, presented at a level several years below what Harry knew and delivered with the halting self-consciousness of a man who had either been away from teaching for a long time or was currently occupied with something that made teaching feel irrelevant. Students around Harry were either taking notes dutifully or beginning to drift. Ron drew a basilisk in the margin of his parchment. Hermione was taking notes with the dedicated thoroughness of someone collecting data even when the data wasn't valuable. Halfway through the class, Quirrell made eye contact with Harry. It was an accident. A real one. Harry could see in the instant before Quirrell's expression reformed that he hadn't meant to look directly, had been moving his gaze across the room as performance and had snagged on Harry without intending to. And when their eyes met, the scar didn't just sing, it flared, hot and sharp and deliberate, and Harry felt the presence behind the door push forward with a sudden, hungry urgency. He looked at Quirrell for 1 second, 2 seconds, holding the eye contact with the easy steadiness of someone who has nothing to hide and nothing to be afraid of and knows it, and watched Quirrell become visibly uncomfortable, watched the sweat bead at his temple, watched the hands tighten on the desk, and then, very deliberately, let his gaze slide away to his notebook as if the moment had been nothing. He wrote, 2 people in one place, and underlined it once, and Ron, reading it sideways, gave him a look of pure confusion that Harry answered with a small headshake. After class, in the corridor, what did you write? Ron asked, crowded by the stream of students heading to Transfiguration. Just a note, Harry said. About what? Our defense professor, Harry said, has a very unusual hat. And he walked ahead without looking back, and Ron spent the next 20 minutes being quietly baffled before the meaning of 2 people in one place resolved for him somewhere around the second-floor landing. Oh, Ron said, catching up. Oh. That's actually, not now, Harry said pleasantly. Transfiguration. Professor McGonagall turns into a cat, which I want to see. She had, in fact, already been the cat when they arrived, sitting on her desk with the implacable authority of someone who has been making this point for 30 years and finds it no less satisfying for the repetition. She transformed back as they filed in, and the collective startle of 30 11-year-olds was enormously entertaining. Harry was already grinning. McGonagall looked at the class. Her gaze landed on Harry and held for a moment. He saw her do the same thing everyone did, the recognition, the scar, the name in her eyes, but what followed was different from everyone else. No reverence. No awe. The assessing look of a craftsperson evaluating materials. Mr. Potter, she said. Professor, he said. You're smiling. You turned into a cat. It was impressive. A fractional pause. Thank you, she said, with the measured quality of someone accepting a compliment that is also an opening. I expect you find many things at Hogwarts impressive, given your preparation. Something in the way she said preparation suggested she'd been briefed, or had gathered intelligence of her own. Some things, Harry said honestly. Other things I find interesting rather than impressive. The difference being whether the impressive part has stopped moving. McGonagall looked at him for another moment. Something moved through her expression that Harry filed as complicated relationship with this student incoming, and not in a bad way. We will, she said, get along fine. Provided you apply that attitude to your actual coursework and not merely to the novelty of the experience. That seems fair, Harry said. She taught the class. She was exceptional, clear, demanding, with the specific quality of someone who expected a lot because they respected the subject enough to know what it required. Harry liked her immediately in the way he liked things that were genuinely themselves. He also liked that she was clearly watching him throughout the lesson with the careful assessment of someone who was not sure yet whether she was looking at an asset or a variable. He turned a matchstick into a needle on the third attempt, which was fine, not first attempt, because he wanted information about this particular branch of magic before he started pushing it, and first attempt was a data point that closed options rather than opening them. Hermione did it on the first attempt, loudly, which Harry appreciated about her. After class, McGonagall kept him back for approximately 45 seconds, just long enough to say, quietly, "I knew your parents. Your mother especially. She would be very proud," and then dismiss him without waiting for a response that would have been, in the moment, inadequate. He thought about what she'd said for the rest of the day. Not painfully. More in the way he thought about Heloise in the bookshop saying she was a remarkable witch, with the weight of a thing that mattered, a thread connecting him backward to people he'd never known, a life that had been briefly and violently interrupted before his could start. Hermione found him on the stairs that evening, on the way back to the tower. "Are you all right?" she said, which was blunt and direct and exactly how she did everything. "Fine," Harry said. "Just thinking about parents." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, carefully, "Mine are dentists. They're alive and supportive and entirely confused by all of this. So I don't actually know what that's like." Another pause. "But I imagine it's something," Harry said. "That's the most accurate word I have for it. It's something." She accepted this without pushing it. They walked up the stairs together, and Ron fell into step beside them from a landing above, having apparently been waiting for them for some unspecified amount of time for no specific reason. "What are we having for dinner?" he said. "Ron," Hermione said. "What?" "It's 6 o'clock and I've been thinking about it since herbology. You have a one-track mind. I have a focused mind." Harry, between them, felt something settle in his chest that was warm and specific and felt, surprisingly, a great deal like coming home to a place he hadn't known he was looking for. He sent a message to that feeling, quietly, the way Wade had taught him to deal with new things: "I see you. I'll come back to you. One thing at a time." And then, out loud, "Pork chops," he said. "What?" said Hermione. They had pork chops at lunch. Usually repeats are different, but I saw them bring a second delivery this morning. My guess is pork chops again. You noticed a food delivery at 6 a.m.? Ron said. I notice things. Ron looked at him. Pork chops, he said, with the solemn decisiveness of a man whose priorities are clear. Hermione made a noise. But she was smiling. The three of them went to dinner. It was pork chops. Chapter 4, Troll Math, 1 troll plus 2 idiots equals best friends forever. The letter from Wade arrived on a Thursday morning in October, delivered by Hedwig with the proprietary satisfaction of an owl who considered personal correspondence her highest calling and everything else a distraction from it. She landed on Harry's arm at the breakfast table, ignored Ron's attempt to offer her bacon, and waited with pointed patience while Harry untied the note. Ron, who had by this point met Hedwig approximately 40 times and been snubbed 40 times, took the bacon back with the philosophical acceptance of someone who has stopped taking it personally. Harry unfolded the note. Kid. How's school? I'm handling 3 contracts simultaneously and one of them is in Istanbul, which is great because the food is excellent and I've been thinking about whether baklava is something I could make at home. The answer is probably yes, but I'll probably burn it. Also Weasel says hi. He drew another card. I'm not telling you what's in it until Christmas. More importantly, heard through the relevant channels that your potions professor has been making your life difficult. Give me a threat level. 1 to 10, 1 being mildly unpleasant and 10 being I'm coming to Scotland. Also, the turban situation. I know you're handling it. I trust you to handle it. I'm just saying the word turban 3 times so you know I know. Turban. 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 Miss you. Eat something green occasionally. WPS. I taught Hedwig how to make a disapproving face. She was already doing it naturally, but now she knows it's on purpose. Harry read it twice. Folded it. Tucked it in his jacket. The warm thing in his chest that lived there for Wade-related reasons did its thing briefly, and then Harry was back to breakfast. Good news? Ron said, around the bacon. My dad wants a threat-level assessment on Snape. Ron considered this. What's the scale? 1 to 10. 10 means he comes to Scotland. Ron looked at the staff table, where Snape was sitting with the particular posture of a man who found the air around him personally offensive. What number gets him here fastest? Ron, Hermione said, without looking up from her book. I'm asking for information purposes. Snape is at about a 4, Harry said. Unpleasant. Biased. But nothing I can't handle. He poured himself more juice. He wanted to make my first lesson dramatic and it didn't land the way he planned. I think that bothered him more than whatever the actual point of it was. The first potions lesson with Snape was already something of a legend in Gryffindor, which Harry found disproportionate but unsurprising. What had happened was this: Snape had swept into the dungeon classroom with the theatrical gravity of a man who had rehearsed his entrance, and had then begun asking Harry rapid-fire questions in the manner of someone setting up a humiliation. Bezoars, aconite, monkshood, the difference between wolfsbane and its component elements. Harry had answered every single one, concisely and correctly, without particular drama, in the tone of someone running through a checklist they'd prepared in advance because they'd suspected exactly this kind of thing might happen. The silence after the last answer had been extremely interesting. Snape had said, very quietly, 5 points to Gryffindor, and moved on to the lesson. He hadn't been warm after that. But he'd been scrupulously, carefully fair, in the specific way of someone who had realized that the grounds on which he'd planned to operate had shifted and was recalculating without giving anything away. Harry had found this more interesting than the original plan would have been. He keeps watching you, Hermione said now, her book still open but clearly not being read. In class. Not the way he watches other people. He's trying to figure me out, Harry said. Doesn't that bother you? It'd bother me more if he'd stop trying. Hermione finally put her book down. She did this when she'd reached a point where the conversation was more interesting than whatever she was reading, which Harry had learned was a meaningful indicator. Why? Because someone who's trying to figure me out is someone who hasn't decided yet. People who've decided are more dangerous than people who are still watching. He shrugged. And Snape is sharp. If he decides to be an ally at some point, he's worth having. Ron, who had been following this exchange with the expression of someone watching a sport they didn't entirely understand but found compelling, said, "You think Snape could be an ally?" "I think Snape loved my mother," Harry said, calmly, and ate a piece of toast. A considerable silence followed this. "How do you?" Ron started. "He says her name in class sometimes. Not out loud, not even consciously, just under his breath when he passes the ingredients she apparently specialized in. And the way he looked at me the first day wasn't hatred. It was something more complicated that had hatred's shape but a different origin." Harry paused. "He resents me partly because I'm James Potter's son and they apparently had a genuinely difficult relationship. But the other part is something else. I'm still mapping it." Hermione stared at him. "You got all of that from watching him in 3 weeks of potions." "My dad taught me to watch people." "Your dad," Ron said slowly, "sounds absolutely terrifying." "He's the least terrifying person I know," Harry said, honestly. "Which is what makes him so effective." Wade arrived on Halloween without telling anyone he was coming, which was classic Wade, and the first Harry knew about it was when Hedwig returned from her morning flight with a folded note that simply said, "I'm in Hogsmeade. Come to the 3 Broomsticks at noon if you can. Brought chimichangas." Harry looked at the note. He was technically not supposed to be in Hogsmeade. 3rd year was the official cutoff for village visits, but he also had a very clear personal policy about rules that existed for reasonable safety purposes versus rules that existed because someone had drawn a line and forgotten to explain why. He had the map of the castle and grounds that he'd been building in his head since September, and he knew 3 routes to Hogsmeade that avoided the main gate. He mentioned this to Ron, who said, "Obviously I'm coming," and Hermione, who said, "We absolutely should not do this," and then came anyway on the grounds that someone needed to be there who had read the relevant school bylaws and could therefore construct a technically defensible argument if challenged. They made it to Hogsmeade in 20 minutes using a route that went through a gap in the east wall that the castle seemed to have simply decided to allow, which Harry chose to interpret as architectural permission. Wade was at the 3 broomsticks in a booth in the back corner, without the mask, which meant he'd done a basic assessment of the room and decided it was safe enough, which was its own kind of statement about wizarding pub security. He was eating a chimichanga that he'd clearly brought himself because 3 broomsticks did not serve chimichangas, and he was reading a Muggle newspaper that stuck out in the wizarding pub with the same energy as someone showing up to a Renaissance fair in jeans. Harry slid into the booth across from him. Wade looked up. The grin that crossed his face was immediate and completely unguarded, the grin that Harry had grown up recognizing as the Wade-specific expression that he'd never perform for anyone else, and something in Harry's chest unknotted like a fist opening. "Hey, kid," Wade said. "Hey," Harry said. Wade looked at Ron and Hermione standing at the edge of the booth with the assessing look he gave everyone new, which lasted approximately 3 seconds and seemed to collect a significant amount of data. "These the ones?" he said to Harry. "Ron Weasley," Harry said. "Hermione Granger." "Wade Wilson," Wade said. "Sit down, I brought food." "Hermione, you have the look of someone who's already identified 3 school policies we've violated getting here." Hermione sat down slowly, looking at Wade with the particular expression she had when she was encountering something she'd heard about secondhand and was now recalibrating against the primary source. "4, she said. "But 2 of them are arguably ambiguous in their application to students with a non-standard legal guardian." "I love her," Wade said to Harry immediately. "I know," Harry said. "I told you." Ron had already spotted the extra chimichangas. He sat down. "Are those for sharing?" "Everything I bring to this table is for sharing," Wade said. "That's a household rule. Ron, right? Your brother is a cursebreaker at Gringotts." Ron looked up, surprised. "How do you know that?" "Harry writes long letters. It's a thing he got from me. I'm very proud and also I read every word." He pushed the chimichangas into the middle of the table. "Tell me about school." "Real version, not the version you tell a normal adult." So Harry told him. The real version. Quirrell and the turban and the door in his head and the feel of the presence behind it pushing when they made eye contact. The Philosopher's Stone, the reasoning Harry had worked out about Dumbledore's intent. Snape and his complicated feelings about Harry's mother. The state of the 3rd-floor corridor on the right-hand side, which Harry had by now confirmed housed a 3-headed dog of significant size, because of course it did. Wade listened to all of it with the focused attention he gave to things that mattered. He ate his chimichanga. He asked 3 questions, all of them the specific kind that opened the next layer of a problem rather than trying to solve the current one. Ron and Hermione ate and listened to this exchange with the rapt quality of people watching a conversation that was operating several registers above the surrounding noise, occasionally adding details, Ron about the Quidditch season and the specific mystery of Harry's flying ability, Hermione about what she'd found in the library regarding ancient blood protections. "You flew without a lesson," Wade said, looking at Harry. "First practice," Harry said. "Caught a remembrall from what McGonagall later told me was about 50 feet up. Apparently the instinct is genetic. My dad, my birth father, played Quidditch. And McGonagall's response to this was to immediately put you on the house team. She came and found me before the practice was over." Wade looked at the ceiling. "Of course she did." He looked back. "You're okay with it?" "The Quidditch." "I love it," Harry said, with a simplicity and directness that was relatively rare for him, because it was true and it was the kind of true that didn't need qualification. It's the first time since the magic started that something felt completely physical and completely magic at the same time without a gap between them. Like they were always supposed to work together, and flying is where that becomes obvious. Wade looked at him for a moment. Yeah, he said quietly. That's important. That kind of thing is important. He cleared his throat. What kind of broom? Nimbus 2000. Is that good? It's the best production broom available, Hermione said, who had looked it up. McGonagall arranged it, Harry added. Okay, I officially like McGonagall, Wade said. Cautiously. She still works for Dumbledore, so there are structural issues, but the broom is a point in her favor. He looked at Ron. You play? Trying out next year, Ron said, through chimichanga. Keeper. Any good? Ron shrugged with the specific modesty of someone who thought they were good and wasn't sure yet if they were allowed to say so. He's very good, Hermione said, without looking up, in the tone of someone who has observed something factually and is reporting it. Ron went slightly red. Focused intently on his food. Wade watched this dynamic with the expression of a man filing away information for a later date. Then he looked at Harry. The turban situation, he said quietly. I know, Harry said. Timeline. Harry thought about it. I think Dumbledore is letting it play out until the end of the year. He's watching. Snape is watching. I actually think Snape has already figured out what I've figured out, which is interesting given what I think Snape's actual loyalty is. He paused. The stone is there as the bait. Voldemort goes for it. Someone goes through the traps to stop him. You think Dumbledore expects you to go through the traps? I think Dumbledore has built traps that a specific 11-year-old with specific skills can navigate, yes. Wade was quiet for a moment. Drinking his butterbeer, he tried it, declared it inexplicably good, and was now on his second. And the traps are designed to make sure it's you who makes it through. So that you face Voldemort alone. So you have to choose. Yes. And the choice is what he needs. Not just Voldemort stopped, the proof that you'll do it voluntarily. That you'll sacrifice yourself for others. Wade's voice was level, but something underneath it was not. He's building the sacrifice. Same as last time. Different configuration. Harry met his eyes. I know. What are we going to do about it? I'm going to go through the traps, Harry said. Because Voldemort needs to be stopped and I'm the best person to stop him, and those are both true regardless of whether Dumbledore is also using the situation. He paused. But I'm going to go through them on my terms. Knowing what I know. Which is different from going through them as the piece Dumbledore thinks he's moving. Wade looked at him for a long moment. The pub moved around them, ordinary and oblivious. Someone at the bar was having an argument about Quidditch statistics. A witch near the window was reading the Daily Prophet with the focused unhappiness of someone who expects bad news and is getting it. Okay, Wade said. Okay. He exhaled. When it happens, you come back. I will. That's not a suggestion. I know. If something tries to stop that from being an option, you deal with it and come back anyway. Your regeneration isn't at my level, but it's there. You've tested it. Harry had tested it, methodically and without anxiety, over the past 2 years, minor injuries that healed faster than they should, a broken arm at 9 that had resolved in 4 hours, a compound recovery from a fever at 10 that had his pediatrician deeply confused and Wade deeply unsurprised. He wasn't Wade level, not remotely, but he healed fast and he knew it, and he'd incorporated it into how he moved through risk the way Wade had always incorporated his own. I'll come back, Harry said simply. Wade looked at him. Then he picked up his butterbeer. Okay, he said, for the last time, in the tone that meant the conversation was closed because it was settled. Tell me about the Quidditch. I want to know about the flying. Harry's face opened up in the way it did when he talked about flying, the ease and warmth of something genuinely loved, something that was entirely his. He talked. Ron added commentary. Hermione pointed out that statistics favored Gryffindor this year based on her analysis of the previous 3 seasons, which was either deeply reassuring or alarming depending on whether you found Hermione's statistical confidence comforting. They stayed for 2 hours, and the afternoon light through the 3 broomsticks windows went from gold to amber, and it was the best afternoon Harry'd had at Hogwarts yet, loud and easy and warm and entirely itself. When they left, Wade walked them to the edge of the village. He hugged Harry once, briefly, the fierce specific hug that said everything neither of them was going to put into words while other people were nearby. Harry held on for 1 second longer than usual and then let go and stepped back and was fine, was completely fine, because he was 11 and he'd been practicing being fine for 8 years and it was an excellent skill. "Merry Christmas," Wade said. "It's October," Harry said. "I'm manifesting an uneventful November." Harry grinned. "Turn to go." Turned back. "I'll write when the Quidditch match happens. I'll be watching for it." Wade pointed at Ron and Hermione. "Both of you. Look after yourselves and each other. You're good people." He said this with the direct, uncomplicated sincerity that he deployed when he meant something completely. And look after him, even though he doesn't need it. Do it anyway. He likes it, he just won't say. "Dad," Harry said. "I'm just saying. Walk away before I take points away from whatever house adults are assigned to." Wade walked away, whistling something. The tune was the A-Team theme, which Harry had heard him whistle on and off since the age of 3, and which had accordingly become the sound that meant he's okay, everything is handled, he's going. Ron said, beside him, "He's brilliant." "He is," Harry said. Hermione said nothing for a moment. Then, "He loves you very much." "I know," Harry said. They walked back through the gap in the east wall, through the grounds, toward the castle in the October late afternoon light, 3 figures moving through the long Scottish grass, and Harry sent a message to the door in his head, steady, present, entirely ready, and the presence behind it pushed back and he pushed back harder, and the door held, and would keep holding until he chose to open it. On his terms. The troll arrived on Halloween, because of course it did. The feast was halfway through and Harry had been working through an excellent piece of pie while simultaneously explaining to Ron why the castle's magical architecture was more purposeful than it looked when Professor Quirrell burst through the doors to the Great Hall in a dead run, tripped on the threshold, staggered upright, and screamed, "Troll, in the dungeons, thought you ought to know," and then fainted with the theatrical commitment of a man who had been building to this moment. The Great Hall erupted. Children started screaming, pushing back from the tables. Teachers were on their feet. Dumbledore's amplified voice cut through the noise with the calibrated authority of someone who had been waiting, Harry noticed, with very little surprise, for exactly this. "Prefects, lead your houses to the dormitories immediately," Dumbledore commanded. "Teachers, with me." Harry was already on his feet and already thinking 3 moves ahead. His eyes went to the staff table. Quirrell was being helped up by Sprout and was doing an excellent job of looking terrified, which Harry noted was somewhat better acting than his usual standard, which suggested active effort. Snape had already left, moving fast, not toward Dumbledore's group but independently, which was interesting. Dumbledore was watching all of this with the calm of a chess player watching the board develop. Percy Weasley's prefect voice cut through the house noise. "Gryffindors, follow me." The crowd moved. Harry moved with it, and then stopped moving with it, because Hermione was not in the current of people heading for the doors. She was standing at the edge of the Gryffindor table looking at the direction the teachers had gone with an expression that was working through a problem. Ron had already noticed. He doubled back to Harry's side, the Weasley twins streaming past them like complementary currents. "Where's Hermione?" "She doesn't know," Harry said. "Know what?" "That the troll is in the dungeons." He looked at Ron. "Where are the girls' bathrooms on this floor?" Ron went white. "Oh no. They found Hermione in the second-floor bathroom, which was on the route away from the dungeons but not on the route anyone had bothered to think about when the warning had been given. She had been crying, which Harry had suspected from the body language of her exit from dinner 2 hours ago, something Percy had said about showing off, following some classroom incident, and Hermione having absorbed it with a very specific stillness that meant she was going to process it somewhere private, which turned out to be here. She wasn't crying now because there was a 12-foot mountain troll occupying approximately a third of the bathroom, and the presence of a 12-foot mountain troll was sufficient to override most other emotional processing. The troll had not yet noticed Hermione, who had backed against the wall of stalls with the controlled terror of someone whose intellectual knowledge of trolls had just become extremely practical. It was working its way through the sinks with the methodical destruction of something that had never thought about consequences and wasn't planning to start. Harry looked at the troll. He looked at Hermione. He looked at Ron. "Okay," he said, at a normal conversational volume. The troll heard him and turned. Up close, a mountain troll smelled overwhelmingly of something between wet stone and something biological that didn't need further description, and it was considerably more solid-looking than any description had prepared them for. It was also, notably, carrying a club the size of a small tree. Harry tilted his head at it. "Hey!" The troll swung the club. Harry stepped sideways without hurrying, the club going through exactly where he'd been with a gust of displaced air that sent Harry's hair in several new directions. He came back to a standing position with the same unhurried quality. "Ron," Harry said. "Get Hermione out from behind it." Ron, who had been frozen in the doorway, unfroze. He moved along the wall while the troll's attention was on Harry, which Harry was maintaining with the easy, deliberate quality of someone doing a demonstration. He kept moving, not dramatically, not in a way that spent a lot of energy, but enough to keep the troll tracking him, which meant the troll's back was to Ron and Hermione. "Wingardium Leviosa," Harry said, wand out, pointed at the club, and the club went up. The troll grabbed for it, missed, grabbed again, stumbled. Harry held it there, wand steady, the spell running clean and controlled, the way he ran everything, for exactly long enough. The troll sat down with the profound confusion of something that had never had its weapon disagree with it before. It looked at the club floating above its head. It looked at Harry. It reached for the club again. Harry let it have the club and did something different, because a 12-foot creature with a weapon was less dangerous than a 12-foot creature sitting down and confused. He reversed the momentum of the charm, brought it back and up, and let the club arc over and come down on the troll's own head with the precise application of appropriate force, which Harry had developed opinions about over 8 years of training. The troll made a sound like gravel in a washing machine and fell sideways against the stalls and did not get up. The bathroom was very quiet for a moment. Ron was in the corner, standing in front of Hermione, wand out, which Harry noted with approval because he'd moved correctly and held his position correctly, and that was the right thing to do in a flanking scenario. Hermione was pressed against the wall behind Ron, her eyes wide, looking at Harry with the expression of someone whose brain was rapidly filing what they'd just seen under multiple categories simultaneously. "Is it dead?" Ron said. Harry checked. "Stunned. It'll wake up in about 10 minutes, very confused and with an impressive headache." He put his wand away. Then the bathroom door opened and McGonagall came in, followed by Snape and then Quirrell. McGonagall took in the scene, overturned stalls, troll on the floor, 3 first-years standing in the middle of it looking variously disheveled and unhurt, and went very still with the specific stillness of someone managing an extreme response. "What," she said, "on earth has happened here?" "Mountain troll," Harry said. Stunned. "We're fine." Snape's dark eyes were moving over the bathroom, over the troll, over Harry, over the quality of the scene, reading it with the sharp intelligence he applied to everything. Something shifted in his expression that Harry caught and filed, not approval, not yet, but a further recalibration of the assessment he'd been running since September. Quirrell took one look at the stunned troll and then looked at Harry with eyes that had something in them beyond the staged fright, something that was genuine and complicated, and for just a moment, livid. Harry looked back at him with perfect serenity. 5 points from Gryffindor, McGonagall said, her voice doing the work of maintaining authority while her face did the work of being impressed, for being out of bounds. And 10 points each, a pause, for sheer dumb luck. Professor, Hermione said, stepping forward from behind Ron with the brisk determination of someone who has been frightened and is now angry and is channeling the anger into something useful. It wasn't luck. Harry knew exactly what he was doing. McGonagall looked at Harry. Harry looked at McGonagall. 5 points back, McGonagall said quietly, and swept out. Quirrell followed, lingering one moment too long in the doorway, looking at Harry. Harry looked back with the same expression he'd given Quirrell in class, open, direct, nothing hidden, everything seen. The moment lasted until Quirrell left. Snape was last. He paused at the door, and for a fraction of a second his gaze met Harry's, and what moved through it was layered and old and complicated but had, at its base, the same thing Harry had been mapping since September, not hatred. Not warmth either. Something more like reluctant recognition. He left without saying anything. Ron exhaled, a massive release of held air, and sat down on the edge of the nearest intact sink. Right, he said. Right. Okay. Okay, Hermione said, and then looked at Harry with brown eyes that were still wide and asked the question she'd been building to since the moment he'd stepped in the door. Where did you learn to fight a troll? My dad taught me to fight first, Harry said. The magic fills in the blanks. Your dad taught you to fight a 12-foot troll. He taught me to fight anything. The scale just changes the variables. Hermione stared at him. She was still processing, Harry could see, running through what she'd watched, filing it, cross-referencing it against everything she thought she knew about what an 11-year-old was supposed to be able to do, arriving at conclusions that were simultaneously obvious and surprising. Then she did something Harry hadn't expected. She walked forward and hugged him. Brief, fierce, and slightly awkward in the way first hugs from people who didn't hug often were, and then she stepped back and looked at him and Ron with a brightness in her face that was past the fear and the crying and the ceiling of who she'd thought they all were. Right, she said, exactly as Ron had said it, and it meant the same thing, I'm here and I'm okay and that was real and we did it together. Friends? Ron said, to the room in general. Friends, Harry said. Hermione rolled her eyes. Obviously, she said, which for Hermione was equivalent to everyone else in the world tattooing it on their forehead. Quidditch happened on November 14th, and it was important for 2 reasons. The first was that Harry caught the snitch in 4 minutes and 20 seconds, which was not only the fastest first game catch in Gryffindor's history but also accomplished while apparently dealing with a broom that had developed a violent objection to basic instructions for the middle portion of the game. The second reason was that Harry, during the period when his broom was attempting to dislodge him from a height that would have concerned most people and was concerning Ron and Hermione in the stands to a significant degree, used the time to observe who in the staff section was pointing their wand at him and saying a counter-curse, which was an interesting question and had an interesting answer. He'd gripped the broom with both hands, legs wrapped around it, broom bucking and twisting, and he'd been fine. The height didn't get to him, the physical danger didn't get to him. He'd survived worse at age 7 in a training session when Wade had misjudged the parameters of a sparring exercise and Harry had spent a brief and educational 40 seconds in freefall, and he'd used the surplus of mental bandwidth that not panicking made available to scan the stands. Snape, he saw immediately, the concentration, the wand, the barely audible incantation running under his breath, directed at Harry's broom. Fighting the curse. And across the staff section, someone else, Quirrell, lips moving with the specific rhythm of a held spell, wand invisible but the magical pressure directed at Harry with the personal, purposeful quality of a curse designed to find one specific target. Harry committed both observations to memory and then caught the snitch because the snitch had moved into his range and waiting longer was just inefficient. The after-game celebration in the Gryffindor changing rooms involved a great deal of noise and Fred Weasley presenting Harry with what he described as a ceremonial chimichanga that he'd made in the kitchens on the grounds that Harry had mentioned them once in passing and Fred had decided to honor the tradition, which Harry appreciated with complete sincerity. Hermione found him an hour later on the edge of the pitch. She'd done research with the speed and focus of someone who'd been suspicious since the game and had run straight to the library on the final whistle. Snape was performing a counter-curse, she said, without preamble. Which means someone else was performing the curse. Which means, Quirrell, Harry said. She stopped. You already knew. I watched it happen. She absorbed this. During the game. While your broom was, I wasn't going to fall, Harry said. So the time was available. Hermione stood there for a moment with the expression she'd been wearing with increasing frequency since the bathroom troll incident, the one that was revising him upward in some ongoing assessment she was conducting, and then she said, carefully, you're not afraid of heights. No. You're not afraid of much of anything. Not really. Does that ever worry you? The not being afraid? She was asking honestly, not critically, with the directness she applied to real questions. Harry thought about it. My dad is the same way. And I've watched him deal with not being afraid for 8 years. The danger isn't the absence of fear. The danger is mistaking the absence of fear for the absence of risk. He looked at the pitch, at the goalposts going dark in the November evening. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm careful because I don't want to. Those are different things, and the second one is more useful. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. That's a real distinction. He talks about it a lot. The difference between fearlessness and recklessness. He seems like a very specific kind of person, Hermione said. He's the most specific person I've ever met, Harry said, with warmth that was just warmth, uncomplicated. Which is probably why it works. She looked at the sky for a moment, thinking. Then, Quirrell is going to try again. Yes. Before the end of the year. Yes. The stone is the mechanism. Harry looked at her. I've been working through the trap sequence. There are 6 of them. Based on the staff roster and what I know about each professor's specialty, I can identify who designed each layer. He paused. It's actually very clever. Someone who didn't know what they were walking into would find it very difficult. Someone who'd done the reading would find it manageable, Hermione said, and her voice had the specific quality it got when she was deciding to commit to something. What's the component I'd be responsible for? Harry looked at her. He hadn't asked. He'd been deliberately not asking because he didn't want her in more danger than her proximity to him already created. Harry, she said, in the tone of someone who has already decided and is not interested in being argued with. I'm your friend. I've read everything available about this castle and its magical protections. I am, functionally, the most prepared person to deal with whatever Dumbledore built as the logic challenge. She met his eyes. Let me help. He looked at her. He thought about Wade saying look after him, even though he doesn't need it. Do it anyway. He thought about the specific weight of letting people in, the way it felt different from being alone, not because it was safer but because it was truer. Potions puzzle, he said. 7th layer from the entry. Logic problem disguised as a magical challenge. Snape's contribution, I think. Her eyes lit up in the way they did when presented with a problem worth solving. I'll research his work, she said, immediately. Hermione. Yes. Thank you. She looked at him with something that was direct and unguarded and completely genuine. You do it for me, she said. Instantly, he said. Then we're even before we've started, she said, and pulled her robes tighter against the November cold, and they walked back to the castle together. December arrived, and with it the specific pressure change of something building toward a conclusion. Harry felt it in the door, the presence behind it growing more restless, more urgent, the way it pushed against the boundary on cold mornings when the castle was quiet. He felt it in Quirrell, who was beginning to fray at the edges in the specific way that 2 people occupying one space eventually did, the turban slightly crooked some mornings, the stutter inconsistent in ways it hadn't been in September, the eyes coming to Harry in class with a frequency that was moving from calculated to compulsive. He wrote to Wade, tension increasing. Stone still in place. I think we have until spring. Possibly Easter. Voldemort is running out of patience and that's going to start changing Quirrell's behavior. Wade wrote back, noted. I'm in London for the next 3 months. Say the word and I'm there in 4 hours. Also, eat something green. I have it on good authority you've been surviving on pie and whatever Ron's mum sends. Harry was, in fact, surviving partly on pie and partly on what Molly Weasley sent, which was the most food per parcel of any care package he'd encountered and came with notes that were warm and maternal and slightly overwhelming in a way he didn't have a specific feeling for yet. Ron's family had invited him for Christmas. Harry had said yes without hesitation, for reasons that were layered. He genuinely liked the Weasleys, and Hogwarts at Christmas with its skeleton crew was also interesting, and Wade was 4 hours away by any transport method, and any of these things alone would have been enough. What he hadn't expected was the burrow. He'd imagined it from Ron's descriptions, chaotic, too small, loud, but description failed the actual experience of standing in front of a building that had been added to so many times in so many directions that it had become its own organic thing, less like architecture and more like evidence of a family that kept growing and kept making room. There were garden gnomes. There was a clock on the kitchen wall with hands for each family member and a setting that said mortal peril, which Harry found both funny and extremely practical. And Molly Weasley, who came out the kitchen door when they arrived with the direct, uncomplicated warmth of someone for whom hospitality was not a performance but a reflex, and who hugged Harry on sight with the ease of someone who'd already decided he was welcome and considered the discussion settled. She stepped back and looked at him and said, "Too thin," in a diagnostic tone. "I've been told," Harry said. She turned to lead them inside and then turned back. "Your father, does he know you're here?" "He's in London. I'll write him when we arrive." She nodded once, with the expression of someone running a quiet assessment, and then, "He's welcome here. Whenever he likes." She said it simply, the way she said everything, without ceremony. Harry absorbed this. "I'll tell him," he said. She patted his arm and went inside, already talking about dinner, and Harry stood in the Burrow's garden for one more moment and felt the specific quality of a place where people were both fiercely themselves and completely welcome, and thought about a cold doorstep in November and everything that had happened since, and made space for all of it to be true at the same time. The gnome that bit him on the ankle while he was standing there he chose to interpret as grounding. He went inside. He wrote to Wade that night, from the room he was sharing with Ron, while Ron snored with the committed thoroughness of someone who had never once worried about what happened while they were unconscious. He wrote by the light of his wand, on parchment, in the clear handwriting that had somehow developed in defiance of every genetic indicator, "You've been invited to the Burrow whenever you like. Mrs. Weasley has made this decision and it is final, and I have never once in my life encountered anyone who argues with Mrs. Weasley successfully, including people who are used to winning arguments, so I'd recommend just accepting it. School is good. Friends are good. Quirrell is getting worse. Snape is getting more interesting. Dumbledore is watching everything from exactly the distance that maintains plausible deniability, which is a specific kind of skill I respect while also finding it infuriating. I'm okay. Really okay. The kind where I don't have to think about it. Miss you. Come to the Burrow." He sent Hedwig with it, and the owl disappeared into the dark December sky with the soundless efficiency of a predator on a mission, and Harry lay back on the camp bed and looked at the ceiling of a house that was too small and too loud and absolutely full, and waited for the door in his head to settle for the night. It did. He slept. Chapter 5, Down the Trapdoor, Up the Stakes. The mirror appeared in January. Harry found it during one of his late-night walks, which he took approximately once a week for the same reason Wade had always paced the apartment at odd hours, not insomnia, exactly, but the need to think in motion, to let the body work so the mind could run. The castle obliged these walks with a specific generosity, corridors rearranging themselves in ways that were never quite threatening, doors appearing that led somewhere interesting rather than nowhere. This door led to a room on the 4th floor that smelled of dust and disuse and something older, something that had the texture of strong magic gone quiet. Inside, leaning against the far wall and easily 10 feet tall, was a mirror with an ornate gold frame and an inscription running along the top in letters that took Harry approximately 30 seconds to parse as a reversal, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi. He read it correctly on the first try. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He looked at the mirror. He'd read about the mirror of Eris in one of the supplementary texts he'd picked up in Flourish and Blots, not described by name, but the concept was documented in a text on magical objects of narcissistic construction, a classification Harry had found apt and slightly grim. The theory was straightforward enough. The risk was not in the mirror being malicious but in the mirror being accurate. He stood in front of it. He looked at what it showed him. And then he looked at it for a long time, without moving, with the quality of stillness he usually only brought to things that required the absolute management of his own response. What the mirror showed him was not what he expected, which was itself informative. He'd expected his parents, James and Lily, the family he'd lost before he could hold it. He'd expected that gap to show itself, the wound that he carried so quietly that he'd sometimes wondered if it was actually there. It was there. But it wasn't what the mirror showed him most prominently. What he saw was Wade. Sitting at the kitchen table at 4B, feet on the table, reading the newspaper, the coffee cup steaming beside him, the apartment exactly as it had been on 1,000 ordinary mornings, the specific domestic scene of a life that was entirely theirs. And at the table with Wade were people Harry recognized, Ron, Hermione, faces he was still learning, a future he was in the middle of building. And further back, just visible, two figures he knew only from photographs, James and Lily, present but not dominant, not the center of gravity but part of the larger constellation. He was, in what the mirror showed him, simply not alone. That was all. That was the heart of it. He stood with this for a while. He understood the mirror's danger completely, the pull of it, the way it could keep a person standing here substituting its image for the actual work of building what it reflected. He felt the pull. He was honest about feeling it. Then he looked at it one more time, with the directness he brought to all true things, and walked away. He wrote to Wade the next morning, found the mirror of Eris last night. I looked. I'm not going back. Telling you because you'd want to know. Everything it showed me is either already real or in the process of becoming real, which is the correct relationship with your own desires. Wade's response arrived the next afternoon, good. I'm proud of you. That's the response. Also, how's the food? Harry wrote back, pork chops. Wade wrote back, classic. February passed, and March, and the quality of the tension at Hogwarts changed. It wasn't dramatic. Most of what was actually happening at Hogwarts was not dramatic, it was classes and homework and the specific ongoing social project of three people becoming friends in a way that had texture and weight and the occasional friction of three genuinely different minds arguing about things that mattered. It was Hermione's need to be right coming up against Harry's habit of treating certainty as provisional, and Ron's instinctive feel for people filling in the gaps between Harry's analysis and Hermione's data. It was Quidditch, which Harry loved with an uncomplicated physicality that was separate from everything else, 2 more matches, 2 more wins, a rivalry with Slytherin that was becoming interesting in ways that had more to do with Draco Malfoy's increasingly complicated expression every time they met than with the actual sport. Draco had not become an ally. He also hadn't become a fixed enemy. He'd become something more complicated, a person who kept finding Harry in his eye line with the specific frequency of someone who is checking a conclusion they haven't reached yet. He'd stopped the ritual approaches. He'd started arguing in class instead, which Harry found significantly more interesting, because Draco argued well when he forgot he was performing. In defense against the dark arts, which continued to be a lesson in what teaching looked like when the teacher was occupied with something else entirely, Harry sat in the 3rd row and watched Quirrell come apart by degrees. By March, the stutter was almost entirely gone. Not recovered, abandoned, the performance stripped back by the effort of maintaining something else. The garlic smell had intensified in a way that suggested the amounts being used had increased, which meant the thing being kept out was pushing harder. The eyes came to Harry in class with the compulsive frequency of something navigating toward a destination it had fixed on. Harry watched all of this and said nothing and kept his hand steady in class when he knew the answer, which was always Snape. He watched differently. Snape by March was taught in the specific way of someone managing two things at once, the public performance of his potion's mastery, immaculate and acid and demanding, and something private that was moving faster than he wanted it to. He'd begun docking points from Slytherin occasionally, which was unusual enough to be notable. He looked at Harry in the corridors sometimes with an expression that was moving, slowly and apparently against its will, towards something that might in 10 years become respect. One afternoon in late March, after a potions class that had gone particularly well, Harry's draft of Living Death at the stage of production that Snape had, after a silence, described as adequate, which they both knew meant excellent, Snape kept him back. The dungeon emptied. Snape stood at his desk looking at Harry's sample vial with the focused attention he gave to things he was deciding about. Your mother, Snape said, not looking up, produced the same base texture in this potion on her first attempt. At 16. Harry said nothing, waiting. You've produced it at 11, with 4 months of formal instruction. Now he looked up. The dark eyes were doing their assessment with the openness Harry had been waiting for. You were taught at home. Yes. By a muggle. Primarily. I also had 8 years of reading. A pause. The questions I asked you in September. I was ready for them, Harry said. Not apologetically. Not triumphantly. Just factually. Something moved through Snape's expression. Not quite the recognition Harry had mapped, not yet, but the next thing adjacent to it, the thing that came immediately before. Yes, Snape said slowly. I'd gathered. He set the vial down. Who prepared you? My father. Your father. The way Snape said it had the specific weight of someone who knew what your father had meant for a long time and was encountering a new application of it. Wade Wilson. Harry's attention sharpened by a fraction. You looked him up. I have a responsibility of care for students at this school, Mr. Potter. Looking up the legal guardian of a student who arrived with your particular history is basic due diligence. His voice was dry and careful. What I found was interesting. Harry waited. Whatever Wilson is, Snape said quietly, he is not James Potter. No, Harry agreed. He isn't. A long silence. Snape looked at the vial again with the expression of someone making a decision. The obstacle course beneath this school, he said, choosing the words with precision, contains 6 layers. I designed the final one. It is a logic problem. He paused. It is solvable. For the right person. Harry held his gaze. I know. Something in Snape's expression shifted further, not surprise, something past surprise, something that was arriving at a conclusion with the complicated feelings of someone who'd suspected it but hadn't wanted to be right. You've been preparing, he said. Since September, Harry said. For an outcome you anticipated. Yes. Snape was quiet for a moment. The Philosopher's Stone is real, he said, dropping any remaining pretense of context. And Quirrell is not Quirrell. I know. And you intend to go down there. When it's necessary. Another silence. Snape picked up the vial, held it to the light, set it back down. My contribution to the obstacle course allows passage for one person in one direction, he said, not quite looking at Harry. The logic problem has one correct solution. The potions on either side allow forward movement and backward movement respectively. 1 dose of each. He paused. The backward potion can be left for someone else. Harry heard what Snape was not saying. You're telling me the parameters, he said. I'm describing a potion, Snape said, with magnificent blandness. Harry looked at him. At this sharp, difficult, complicated man who was navigating between debts and loyalties and a specific kind of love that had nowhere to go because its object was gone, and who was communicating, in the only register he apparently had, that he'd chosen a side. "Thank you," Harry said, meaning it completely. Snape's expression did the thing where it nearly arrived at something before retreating. 10 points from Gryffindor for not cleaning up your workspace, he said. My workspace is immaculate, Harry said. 8 points from Gryffindor. Harry collected his bag and left, and did not smile until he was in the corridor, and then only briefly, and only because Snape had essentially just told him he wasn't alone down there without using a single word that could be quoted, which was, Harry felt, a genuinely elegant piece of communication. April arrived and Harry's scar started waking him up at night. Not with pain, not the sharp targeted pain of eye contact, but a pressure, constant and building, that felt like the presence behind the door pressing both hands flat against it and leaning. He lay in his four-poster in the dark dormitory listening to Ron snoring and the castle's nighttime sounds and felt Voldemort's urgency like weather, like the particular atmospheric pressure change before a storm that animals felt and most people didn't. He wrote to Wade, I think it's close. Weeks, not months. He's going to make a move before the end of term. I can feel the timeline accelerating. Wade wrote back within the day, which meant he'd been waiting, understood. I'm in London. 4 hours. The word is the word. I trust your judgment on timing, but the moment you know, you tell me. I know, Harry wrote back. I will. He told Ron and Hermione on a Saturday morning in April, in the library, because they deserved to know the timeline and because Harry had decided in October, watching The Troll, that doing things alone was a choice rather than a necessity and he was going to keep making it a choice rather than a default. He laid it out clearly. All of it, Quirrell, Voldemort, the stone, Dumbledore's design, the trap sequence and what he knew about each layer. He told them about Snape's confirmation. He told them about his scar and the door and the building pressure of proximity. Ron listened with his arms crossed and the particular expression he wore when something had shifted from interesting to real and he was processing the scale of it. Hermione listened with complete stillness and a quill in her hand that she didn't use, because taking notes felt insufficient for the actual content of the conversation. When Harry finished, there was a silence that had weight. So Dumbledore knows, Ron said, slowly. Dumbledore has known since September that the situation would come to a head. The trap sequence is specifically designed to be passable by me. He's using the stone to force the encounter. And he didn't tell you any of this. No. Ron's jaw set. I have a lot of feelings about that. Me too, Harry said. But you're going anyway. Voldemort being stopped is still the right outcome regardless of whether Dumbledore's methodology is sound, Harry said. The goal is good. The means are what I have feelings about. Can we change the means? Hermione said. Harry looked at her. That's what I'm hoping. She spread her hands, inviting the question. Dumbledore's plan requires a sacrifice, Harry said carefully. An 11-year-old walking into something alone. That's the dramatic weight of it, the lone hero facing the darkness, and the protection that sacrifice generates. But the protection comes from love, Hermione said, catching up with him, her eyes bright with the specific brightness of someone seeing where a line of reasoning is going. Not from solitude. Lily Potter's protection was love freely given. The sacrifice element is Dumbledore's addition, Harry said. Not the original mechanism. A silence. So if you go down there and you're not alone, Ron said slowly, and you stop Voldemort, and you come back, then Voldemort is stopped and no 11-year-old has to be sacrificed for it and Dumbledore learns that his plan works better without the parts where people die or almost die for his narrative purposes, Harry said. Which is a lesson I think is worth teaching. Ron looked at him for a long moment. You have, he said, the most terrifying way of saying things calmly that I have ever encountered in my life. My dad says the same thing. Your dad is a very perceptive man. Hermione had opened her notebook and was writing. Okay, she said, with the sound of someone engaging full capacity. I've been researching the logic puzzle layer since November. I've cross-referenced Snape's known academic publications with the documented trap design precedents for Hogwarts security modifications, and I'm fairly confident I can solve it in under 2 minutes. She didn't look up. I'm also going back up to get Dumbledore. He can say all he likes about trusting the mechanism, but if he's here and it all goes wrong, we need an adult who can actually. That's smart, Harry said. She looked up, slightly surprised by the immediate agreement. Genuinely smart, he said. He needs to be here. Not to rescue me, I don't need rescuing. But as a witness. If he's not here, whatever happens in that room is his story to tell later. If he's here, it's everyone's story, Hermione said. Exactly. Ron stood up from the library table with the decisive energy of someone who has processed enough to know what he's doing next. Right. So I need to get better at chess. Harry blinked. McGonagall's contribution, Ron said. You said it was a chess game. A giant chess game. He looked at Harry with the earnest confidence of someone identifying their specific value. I'm the best chess player in our year. Probably in our house. He paused. I know I'm not, I know I don't have the fighting thing, or the, he gestured vaguely at Harry's general hairiness, all of that. But chess. That's mine. Harry looked at him. He thought about what Wade had said about letting people help, about how it felt different from being alone, not because it was safer but because it was truer. He thought about the three of them in the bathroom in October, how Ron had moved correctly, had held his position, had done the right thing without instruction. He thought about Hermione in the library every morning before breakfast, and every evening after dinner, quietly making herself ready for something she didn't have to be ready for at all. He thought about the mirror of Eriste, and what it had shown him, and how the only honest thing to do with a desire that was already partially real was to keep building it. Chess, Harry said. Yes. Ron nodded once, with the same finality Harry sometimes saw in Wade, the decision-made nod, the I've thought about it and this is the answer. When do you think it's going to happen? Harry's scar pulsed once, brief and pointed, like something agreeing with the question. Soon, he said. It happened on a Tuesday in May. It happened on a Tuesday because the universe, in Harry's experience, had no particular sense of dramatic occasion. The day started ordinary, breakfast, charms, an argument with Hermione about the theoretical limits of Leviosa class spells that Ron stayed out of on the grounds that it was clearly going to be a good argument and required no help, and then at dinner the owl arrived. Not Hedwig. A school owl, bearing a note in McGonagall's handwriting, addressed to Harry, which said, Professor Dumbledore has been called away urgently to the ministry. He will return tomorrow. Harry read it. Read it again. Set it down. Ron, who had been watching his face, said, Tonight. Tonight, Harry said. The thing was, it was too convenient. Dumbledore conveniently called away, the path cleared, the mechanism ready to run. Either it was Voldemort's move, accelerating the timeline, creating the window, or it was Dumbledore's move, removing himself deliberately to force the hand. Both were possible. Both were consistent with what Harry knew about everyone involved. It didn't matter which. The outcome was the same, if Harry didn't go down there tonight, the stone would be gone by morning. He sent Hedwig with a note to Wade that said, Tonight. Don't come. I know you want to. Don't. I need to do this and come back on my own terms, and you being here changes what comes after in ways neither of us want. I'll send Hedwig the moment it's done. Watch for her. He didn't let himself wonder how long he'd sit with the sent feeling before the response arrived. He looked at Ron and Hermione across the dinner table. Tonight, he said again, quietly. Hermione set down her fork with the decisive precision she brought to moments of commitment. Library closes at 9, she said. That gives me 2 hours. I want to check one more reference for the potions puzzle. Ron was already eating faster. I'm going to need to clear my head, he said, which was Ron, for I need to think about the chess and not talk about it. Meet at the trophy room at midnight. 11:30, Harry said. Before curfew ends, not after. We're not sneaking out. We're walking out. Ron opened his mouth. If we're caught in the corridor before we go down, I'd rather explain than hide, Harry said. Hiding means we're wrong. We're not wrong. Ron closed his mouth. Thought about it. That's you, he said. Yeah. 11:30. Fluffy solved itself. Harry had spent a month idly considering the three-headed dog, had read about them, Norse mythology and Greek origin and the specific magical conditions that governed their attention, and had brought a small, battered harmonica that Wade had given him at age 8 on the grounds that knowing how to play something mattered. Not because he was good at it. He wasn't. But the music was what mattered and he was good enough. 3 notes. The first head went down. The second followed. The third lasted another few bars and then folded, huge and slow, like a building choosing to become rubble gently. Ron stared at the sleeping dog. You played it to sleep. Most things that guard through aggression respond to the thing that made the original condition redundant, Harry said, stepping over a massive paw. The dog wasn't put here because it's clever. It was put here to be a door. He found the trapdoor, pulled it open. Below, darkness, vegetative smell, something living. Devil's snare. The drop was considerable and the landing was the plant, exactly as anticipated, tendrils immediately, everywhere, the instinctive constriction of something that responded to struggle. Harry went still the moment he landed, completely still, with the total physical discipline of someone who had been taught that the opposite of fight isn't surrender, it's choice. The plant, confused by the absence of struggle, hesitated. Hermione landed beside him and went still with the same immediate instinct. She'd done the reading and she trusted the reading, which Harry found one of her best qualities. Ron landed and struggled for 1 second before Harry's hand found his wrist. Still, Harry said. Ron went still. Lumos Maxima, Hermione said clearly, and the light bloomed, and the plant recoiled like something caught in an action it was ashamed of, tendrils retreating, the 3 of them dropping lightly to the stone floor below. They moved. The key room was extraordinary, hundreds of winged keys flocking and diving in the torchlight, broomsticks leaning against the walls, a locked door at the far end with a keyhole that was distinctive, old iron, wing-shaped. Harry took one of the broomsticks and went up without deliberation. From above the flock, the room was a kind of chaotic beauty, hundreds of keys in motion, catching the light in scraps of gold and silver. Harry watched the pattern of them for 30 seconds, understanding that a flock had a logic even when it looked like chaos, movements influenced by neighbors, directions that rippled outward from a source. He found the source, one key, moving faster than the others, slightly bent-winged from previous catching attempts, which made it distinctive. He got it in 11 seconds. Ron, watching from below, made a sound of pure admiration that was entirely unconscious. The chess room stopped them because it was designed to stop them, which was the point. McGonagall's contribution was the best single obstacle in the sequence, a board of monumental proportions, pieces 7 feet tall in black and white marble, the far door visible through their ranks, the mechanism clear. You played your way across. Ron stood at the edge of the board and looked at it with the expression Harry had only seen him wear over an actual chessboard, total, absorbed, present in a way that excluded everything else. He turned to look at the board from 3 different angles. He was quiet for 90 seconds. Then he said, I need to be a knight. He said it with certainty, not performance. The pure, clean certainty of someone who has seen the solution and is naming it. Harry looked at the board. Followed the logic. If you move there, he said, you expose yourself. I know, Ron said. He looked at Harry with the clear-eyed honesty of someone who has thought about this and made peace with it. Their queen will take me. That's the move that opens the board for you. That's how you win. He paused. I'll be fine. It's chess. It'll knock me sideways but I'll be fine. Ron, Harry. Ron's voice was steady. This is what I'm here for. This is my thing. He looked at the board again. Let me do my thing. Harry looked at him for a moment. Thought about the troll, and the formation, Ron holding position correctly, protecting Hermione, doing the right thing without instruction. Thought about 4 months of Ron quietly getting better at chess in the common room every evening, without making it a conversation. Get Hermione back up after, Harry said. Stay with her. Go to McGonagall, tell her everything, tell her I said everything, and get Dumbledore if he's back. Already planned, Ron said. If I'm not back by morning, you'll be back before morning, Ron said, with the specific cheerfulness of someone choosing certainty because the alternative wasn't useful. Now stop having feelings at me and play your position. Harry's position was bishop. He moved where Ron told him, the marble pieces grinding past them with the weight of things that had been waiting to be moved for a long time, the game resolving move by move with the focused efficiency of Ron in full flow. It was remarkable, actually, watching it, the way Ron occupied the game completely, no hesitation, no second-guessing, pure instinct and pattern and the years of chess that his family had made ordinary. The queen took him 2/3 through the board. It was controlled. Ron rode the hit and was down but conscious, already telling them to go, waving them on with the breezy insistence of someone whose plan had worked exactly as designed. Hermione's hands were at his head immediately, checking, competent and fast. I'm fine, go, Ron said, at Harry, with heat. Harry went. The troll room was past, already dealt with, collapsed, probably Quirrell's addition and therefore dismantled by whoever had sent Quirrell down here before them. Snape's potion room was last before the final door, and it was exactly as described, 7 bottles in a line, a logic problem disguised as a challenge for someone who didn't know it was a logic problem. He read the clue once. Solved it in 40 seconds, because the poem was elegant and the solution was sound and Snape had built it for someone who could think, not someone who could guess. He took the correct bottle, forward, small, feels like ice, and looked at the backward potion on the right end of the row. He picked it up. Set it carefully in the most visible spot on the table, the one Hermione would see immediately when she came through. He looked at the final door. He walked through it. The room on the other side of the door was circular and torchlit and smelled of something that was neither magical nor mundane but something adjacent to both, something that had been here a long time and was aware of being looked at. In the center, the mirror of Eriste. Around it, nothing. The room was entirely empty except for the mirror. And Quirrell. He was standing with his back to Harry when Harry entered, looking at the mirror with the intensity of a man who had been here a while and was still not getting what he needed from it. He turned slowly, not startled, he'd heard Harry, or felt the door, or simply knew, and his expression when he turned had none of the stutter, none of the nervousness, none of the months of performance. It was a face in direct contact with the thing wearing it. I wondered when you'd come, Quirrell said. His voice without the stutter was clear and cold and had a quality to it that was not entirely his own. I'm here now, Harry said. Quirrell looked at him with the specific assessment of someone seeing something for the first time clearly after a long blurred view. You're not frightened, he said. No. Most people, I'm not most people, Harry said, pleasantly. And you're not most people either, technically. He looked at the turban. How long has he been in there? Quirrell's expression flickered. Since the summer, he said. Before that, a year of partial contact. He needed a vessel. And you volunteered. I believed, Quirrell said, with the specific weight of a man who had once believed completely and was now somewhere past the place where that word meant anything simple. I thought I would share in the power. Instead you're sharing a head, Harry said. Yes, Quirrell said, and something moved through his face that was, briefly and completely, just pain. It was gone quickly. It doesn't matter. The stone. You'll tell me how to get it from the mirror. I don't know how to get it from the mirror, Harry said honestly. The headmaster set the final enchantment himself. It reveals itself to someone who wants to find it but not use it. Quirrell's voice was controlled, but underneath it something else was speaking, or trying to. You're the only other person who's been in this room. You saw something. You'll tell me what? I saw something, Harry agreed. It had nothing to do with the stone. Quirrell moved. Not dramatically, no speech, no warning, a direct grab, the wand up and aimed at Harry's chest with the clean economy of someone done with conversation. Tell me what you saw. Harry looked at the wand. He was very calm, the way he was always very calm when something had gone from verbal to physical, because training was a thing the body held on to independent of what the mind was doing, and his body knew exactly what to do. He stepped inside Quirrell's reach, got his hand on the wand arm, and redirected. The spell went sideways. Hit the mirror. The mirror rang like a struck bell. Quirrell's free hand found Harry's wrist, and the contact was wrong. Immediately, comprehensively wrong, the skin-to-skin touch burning and blistering in a way that made no sense until Harry remembered Voldemort's presence behind that door and the presence behind his door, the two pressures meeting, and the way Voldemort had been unable to kill him once before because of something his mother had left in him. Still there, apparently. Quirrell yanked back his hand with a hiss of genuine pain, staring at where he'd touched Harry's wrist, the handprint already blistering on his own skin, his own face, like acid. He looked up at Harry with something that was both expressions at once, Quirrell's terror and the thing behind Quirrell's eyes' rage. That's new, Harry said, with genuine scientific interest, looking at the blistering on Quirrell's hand. He turned the wand around in his thinking, the Elder Wand, the Deathly Hallows, all the reading he'd done, and remembered something Wade had said, years ago, about the most powerful weapon in any confrontation being the specific knowledge of what the other person couldn't do. Voldemort couldn't touch him. Couldn't hold him. Couldn't operate through Quirrell while Quirrell was in contact with Harry. Which was, objectively, a significant tactical advantage. He said, to the room, not to Quirrell, not to Voldemort, but to the presence itself, I know you're in there. A silence. Quirrell went very still. And I know you know exactly what I am, Harry said. You've been feeling the door for 8 months. You know there's something behind it that isn't mine. He looked at the mirror, then back. You tried to kill me when I was 1. You couldn't. The thing that stopped you is still here. And I've had 8 years to get ready for you. Quirrell turned. The turban came off. The face on the back of Voldemort's head was described accurately in the books Harry had read, the eyes, the noseless face, the snake-narrow features, and it was something, seeing it, the way all true things about danger were something rather than nothing. But it was not, in Harry's scale of things, as overwhelming as it had been designed by the universe to be. Voldemort looked at Harry. Harry looked back. The snake eyes were red and fixed and had the quality of something that had been calculating since before Harry was born, ancient, intelligent, running assessments with the speed of something that had been building a power base for decades and had reduced every human it had ever encountered to a variable in a longer equation. Harry watched the calculation happen. He watched it arrive at an answer. He watched the answer confuse Voldemort. You are not afraid, Voldemort said. His voice came from Quirrell's moving mouth and from the back face simultaneously, a doubled sound that was designed to be atmospheric. Harry noted the design, logged it as a real quality of the voice rather than dismissing it. No, Harry said. The boy who lived, Voldemort said, with a contempt that was less performed than Harry had expected, genuine, slightly baffled contempt. Standing in front of me like a curiosity. You're a curiosity too, Harry said. You tried to kill me and it didn't work and you've been operating in someone else's head for a year. That's interesting information about your limitations. Something moved through the red eyes that was not an emotion Harry had a clean name for. It was not rage, it was the specific, controlled response of a very intelligent creature encountering a problem it hadn't expected in a variable it thought it had fully mapped. It was, Harry thought, the first time Voldemort had been genuinely surprised in a while. The stone, Voldemort said, is already somewhere you can't access it, Harry said. He felt the truth of this in his pocket, the stone, warm and specific, the mirror having deposited it there at some point while Quirrell was distracted by the talking and the confrontation. He'd felt it arrive without looking. He'd understood Dumbledore's enchantment correctly. He didn't show any of this in his face. "You're going to give it to me," Voldemort said. The red eyes had fixed on him with a quality that was past assessment now, into something older, the pressure of a will that had spent decades bending other people's, the raw force of a personality that had made itself into something that worked by the fact of its own existence being overwhelming. Harry stood in it the way he stood in everything, with the specific quality of a person who had been raised by someone for whom nothing was overwhelming, and had accordingly learned that overwhelm was a choice rather than an inevitability. "No," Harry said, simply. "I can give you things," Voldemort said, and his voice had shifted, away from contempt, into the register that Harry recognized from everything he'd read about how Voldemort operated. The persuasion voice. The voice that had turned Quirrell and turned Pettigrew and turned dozens of others who'd believed they'd chosen when they'd been chosen for. "Your parents are dead," Harry said, without softness or hardness, just the weight of a true thing. "And I had a good childhood anyway. So that's not the leverage you think it is." A beat. Voldemort recalculated. "Power," he said. "I have power," Harry said. "I'm still growing into it, but I'm 11 and I just walked through 6 magical obstacles and I'm standing here. I'm fine on power." "Then what do you want?" Voldemort said, and there was something in it, genuinely, Harry noted with interest, that was an actual question. Not rhetorical. Not tactical. The question of something encountering a variable it couldn't map and demanding data. Harry thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. "Voldemort to stop being a problem," he said. "Tonight isn't that, I know that. You don't have a body, the stone being kept from you sets your timeline back, and at some point you're going to find another way in. But tonight I'm here and you're there and the stone is somewhere you can't reach." He paused. "So tonight's outcome is, you don't get what you came for, and I go home." The red eyes looked at him for a long moment. "You believe," Voldemort said slowly, "that you can simply decide this outcome." "I believe that the outcome is already decided and I'm describing it," Harry said. "There's a difference." Voldemort looked at him, and Harry watched the calculation behind those eyes run and arrive at a wall and run again and arrive at the same wall, and understood that what Voldemort was encountering was the specific problem of a person who couldn't be frightened and couldn't be seduced and couldn't be outweighed by presence or voice or the accumulated gravity of a century of being the most terrifying thing in the room. Quirrell lunged. Both hands this time, face contorted with Voldemort's fury driving it beyond its own capacity, straight for Harry's throat with the speed of something past caution. Harry caught the first hand, turned it, used Quirrell's own momentum and let it carry through, not his strength against Quirrell's, but Quirrell's own force redirected into the contact that burned. Both of Quirrell's hands blistered when they touched him. Quirrell screamed with the overlapping quality of two people screaming from one throat. Voldemort's face was saying things Harry couldn't hear because Voldemort's face was leaving, abandoning Quirrell with the speed of something that had calculated the cost and found it exceeding the benefit, the cold practical departure of a will that had always prioritized survival over everything else, including vessels it had used for a year. Quirrell collapsed. He was falling apart in the way the books had described, hands first, then wrists, the damage radiating outward from every point of contact with Harry. It was not something Harry could stop, and he'd known he couldn't stop it, and he felt the weight of not being able to stop it with the sober, clear-eyed acknowledgement of someone who had always known that some outcomes happened with you and despite you simultaneously. He lowered Quirrell carefully to the floor. The man looked at him with eyes that were only his own, finally, and they were terrified and exhausted and something else, something that was past both. "He's gone," Quirrell said. His voice was his own, thin and stripped bare. "Yes," Harry said. Quirrell looked at him. "Are you going to, I'm not going to do anything to you," Harry said. "You're going to need help. Medical. Magical." He looked at the state of Quirrell's hands. "Significant help. But I'm not your threat." Quirrell made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been something else. "You're not afraid of anything," he said. "I've been told," Harry said. Quirrell closed his eyes. He didn't open them again, but his chest was moving, breathing, thin and fast, but present. Harry had his wand out and had cast the 3 stabilizing charms he'd memorized from a medical magic text he'd read in February on the grounds that knowing what to do if someone was dying near him seemed practical. He stood up and looked at the room. The mirror. The door. His own reflection in the glass, which showed him exactly what it had shown him in January, ordinary and complete and not alone. He reached into his pocket and closed his hand around the stone. He said, to the room, to the departed presence, to the door in his head which had gone entirely quiet for the first time since September, "We'll do this again. And it'll go the same way." The door didn't argue. He went back through the potions room. Hermione's small, deliberate footprints in the dust showed she'd been here already, taken the backward potion, gone, through the chess room where Ron was sitting upright and pale, being looked after by Hermione with the focused efficiency she brought to problems requiring solution. Ron looked up when Harry came through. His whole face opened with the specific brightness of a correct prediction landing. "You're back," he said. "I said I would be," Harry said. "You did," Ron agreed, with satisfaction. Harry looked at them both, his friends, his specific and chosen people, sitting on the stone floor of a chess room beneath a school, looking back at him, and the door in his head was quiet and the stone was warm in his pocket and somewhere above them the castle was settling into the particular quiet of very late night or very early morning. "Come on," Harry said. "Let's go up." Dumbledore was in the hospital wing when Harry arrived. He'd come back, or he'd never left, Harry wasn't entirely sure, and the question of whether the emergency at the ministry had been real or staged was one he filed for later. He was sitting in the chair beside Harry's hospital bed with the expression of a man who had expected a particular story and was looking at a different one. Harry was not in the bed. He was standing at the window looking out at the grounds in the early dawn light, the stone in his closed fist, waiting. "Harry," Dumbledore said, quietly. "Professor," Harry said. A pause. "You found the stone?" "Yes." "And Quirrell?" "He's alive. He needs medical attention urgently. I cast the stabilizing charms but it's beyond me." He turned from the window. "You should send for Madame Pomfrey if you haven't already." "It's been handled," Dumbledore said. He was watching Harry with the blue eyes that Harry had decided, in September, were intelligent before they were kind. Now the intelligence was fully present, running fast, arriving at conclusions. "You went down there alone." "I went down there with Ron and Hermione," Harry said. "Ron played the chess game. Hermione solved the potions puzzle. I handled the final room." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "We did it together." Something moved through Dumbledore's expression. "The plan," Harry said carefully, "was for me to do it alone. The stone reveals itself to someone who wants to find it and not use it, which means someone with the right intention, which you expected to be me, specifically. And the encounter with Voldemort was supposed to be a solo trial." He paused. "What you built is impressive. The trap sequence is genuinely sophisticated. But the part where an 11-year-old faces a dark wizard alone, that's not a feature. That's a design choice. And it's one worth examining." Dumbledore was very still. "I'm not angry," Harry said, and was honest about it. "You made the best plan you knew how to make. But the plan assumed I'd be someone I'm not. It assumed I'd been shaped by the Dursleys, which I wasn't. It assumed I'd be operating from a place of isolation and the need to prove myself, which I'm not. And it assumed that the only way through was sacrifice." He opened his hand. The stone caught the dawn light from the window, warm and specific. "It's not." Dumbledore looked at the stone. Then at Harry. And for the first time since September, the performance of the wise grandfather expression fell entirely away, and what Harry saw underneath was something more real, a man looking at a version of events he hadn't foreseen, processing it with the honesty of someone who was, under everything, genuinely intelligent. "You knew," Dumbledore said. "Since September." "Since before September," Harry said. "Since my dad explained the shape of it." A long silence. Outside the windows, the Hogwarts grounds were very still and very green in the early light. "Your father," Dumbledore said, "is an unusual man." "Yes," Harry said. "He is." Dumbledore looked at him, at this boy who was supposed to be a weapon shaped by grief and loneliness and the careful architecture of a decade's planning, who was instead standing in a hospital wing at dawn with the stone in his open hand and no particular anger about any of it, just the clear-eyed readiness of someone who had always known where he stood and had decided, quietly and completely, to stay there. "What do you want to do with the stone?" Dumbledore asked. "Destroy it," Harry said immediately. "Or return it to Nicholas Flamel with the option to destroy it. It shouldn't exist as a target. As long as it exists, it's an objective." He paused. "Voldemort will find another way in. The stone being gone doesn't stop that. But it removes one vector." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "That is," he said slowly, "exactly correct." "I know," Harry said. He set the stone on the bedside table between them. He sat down in the chair on the other side of the bed, not on the bed, which he refused to be put in, but in the chair, facing Dumbledore across the small space. "We should talk," Harry said. "Really talk. About what comes next and what you think it requires and what I'm actually willing to do and where those things overlap." He held the blue eyes steadily. "You're not my enemy. You're also not the authority on what my life is for. I'd like us to be clear about both of those things." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not the grandfatherly performance. Something more genuine and more complicated, a smile that had acknowledgement in it, and respect, and something that might have been the distant relative of relief. "Very well," he said. The dawn came fully through the window. Somewhere in the castle, students were beginning to wake. On the grounds below, the Forbidden Forest sat enormous and patient and entirely itself. Harry sent Hedwig with one word to London, "Done." She was back with Wade's response before breakfast, "Good. I'm making chimichangas. Come home at the end of term. We have things to celebrate." Harry looked at the note. He looked out the window at the grounds. He thought about a doorstep and a kitchen table and the specific weight of growing up in a house where someone was always, absolutely there. He wrote back, "I'll be there." Chapter 6, Summer's Over, Soldier. The train back to London was loud in the specific way of things ending. Not sadly loud. Hogwarts students going home for summer carried the noise of people who had survived something and were now vibrating with the energy of survival, the particular frequency of young people who had been compressed by months of study and structure and were now decompressing at speed. Compartments full of shouting and trading chocolate frogs and recapping matches and the breathless social accounting of a year that was over. Harry sat in their compartment with Ron and Hermione and felt the year arranging itself in his head the way things arranged themselves after they'd finished happening, not as events but as what they'd added up to, the cumulative weight of September through June turning into something he could hold and examine. Ron had his feet on the seat opposite and was reading the Quidditch coverage in the Prophet with the engaged focus of someone for whom summer meant months of being able to care about Quidditch without any competing obligations. His arm was fully healed, Madame Pomfrey had been exceptional, the chest injury less severe than it had looked in the moment, and Ron had spent the last 2 weeks of term with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew they'd done the right thing and didn't need to discuss it constantly. Hermione had 3 books open simultaneously on the seat beside her, which was physically improbable and characteristically hers. She'd spent the last 2 weeks of term productively furious about the year-end exams, which she'd sat with the concentrated aggression of someone settling a personal score with an academic institution. "I think I may have over-answered the charms practical," she said, to no one specifically. "You got full marks," Ron said, without looking up. "I know. I'm questioning whether full marks adequately reflects the depth of the response." "Hermione," Ron said. You got full marks. That is the full amount of marks. The marking rubric, full, Ron said. Marks. She made a sound of dissatisfied agreement and turned a page. Harry looked out the window at England going past, the green of it, the specific soft green of the English countryside that he'd never grown up with but that felt like something anyway, a landscape that was part of where he came from even if he hadn't known it until this year. Fields and hedgerows and grey stone walls and clouds that were building into something by mid-afternoon. He thought about Dumbledore. The conversation in the hospital wing had lasted 2 hours and had been, in Harry's assessment, the most genuinely interesting conversation he'd had at Hogwarts all year. Dumbledore was, stripped of his performance, exactly what Harry had suspected, brilliant and manipulative and genuinely committed to outcomes that he believed were good and genuinely blind to the cost of how he pursued them. The combination was neither forgivable nor condemnable, which was annoying, because simple things were easier to navigate than complicated ones. What had happened in those 2 hours was not a reconciliation or an agreement or a changing of fundamental natures. What had happened was something more modest and more real. Two people had told each other true things and established that they both understood the map, even if they disagreed about the route. Dumbledore had said, near the end, "I underestimated what it means to raise a child rather than position one." Harry had said, "Yes. You did." Dumbledore had looked at him. "I won't make that mistake again." "I'd rather you make it again than pretend you haven't made it," Harry said. Pretending is what creates the gap between what you think you're doing and what you're actually doing. At least if you make the mistake consciously I can account for it. Something in Dumbledore's eyes had shifted, again that complicated, genuine thing, the expression that wasn't the performance. "You are," he'd said quietly, "remarkably like someone I knew." "My mother?" Harry guessed. "Her too," Dumbledore said. "But I was thinking of someone else." He hadn't said who. Harry had filed it for later. What Harry had on the train now, examining the year, was this: Dumbledore was not his enemy. Dumbledore was a person with enormous power and genuine purpose and a long-standing blind spot about the difference between shaping someone and respecting them, who had now been given, at not insignificant cost to his plans, clear evidence that the blind spot had consequences. What he did with that evidence was information Harry didn't have yet. Voldemort was alive. Disembodied, set back, angry in the specific cold way of something that thought in decades rather than years and had simply moved to the next part of a very long plan. The stone was gone, Dumbledore had kept his word, Nicholas Flamel had been contacted, the decision to destroy it had been made with the philosophical acceptance of a very old man who'd had enough time with the world to be ready to leave it naturally. That particular vector was closed. Others were not. Quirrell was in St. Mungo's, recovering from what Madame Pomfrey described as a magical trauma of significant complexity, which was accurate and slightly understated. Whether he would be tried or treated or both was a question that the ministry was apparently arguing about with the enthusiasm of a bureaucracy encountering a situation its forms didn't cover. Harry looked at the window and thought, Voldemort needs a body. He'll work toward that. The people who were loyal to him before will be working toward it too, carefully, under the surface, in the specific way of people who've been waiting 10 years already and know how to wait. He has roughly 2 years before the situation develops into the next phase. Possibly 3. He thought about what he was going to do with 2 years. "You've got that face," Ron said. Harry looked at him. "What face?" "The thinking at speed face. You do it when you're working something out and I usually wait but we're on a train and I'm bored so." He put the prophet down. "What are you working out?" "Next year," Harry said. "We're not even at summer yet." "I know. But I want to know what we're walking into before we walk into it." He looked at Ron. "Dumbledore told me the defense position has been cursed since Voldemort applied for it and didn't get it. 1 year. Every year, 1 year and then gone. Which means whoever is teaching it next year already has an expiry date." Hermione had put her books down. "He told you that?" "In the hospital wing. As part of the actual honest conversation." Harry paused. I think he's decided honesty is now the more efficient policy. It remains to be seen whether it holds. And the year after that? Hermione said, with the careful precision of someone who'd been doing their own reading and had their own suspicions. I don't know yet. I have theories. He looked at them both. I'll share them when they're more solid. Ron looked at him with the direct, uncomplicated affection that Harry had learned was Ron's baseline, no conditions, no performance, just the simple fact of it. You know, Ron said, most people would take the summer and not think about any of that. Most people weren't born into the middle of it, Harry said. Fair, Ron said. He picked the prophet back up. Then put it down again. I want you to come to the burrow. You asked already. I'm asking again because my mum has been asking me to ask again every letter since April. Harry smiled. I know. She writes to me too. Ron stared at him. She writes to you. Twice a month since Easter. Ron processed this. What does she say? Are you eating properly? Is anyone bothering you? What are your plans for the summer? Whether I've met a nice friend, which I think might be about you. Ron went slightly red in a way that was endearing and completely genuine. She worries, he said, with the defensive affection of someone who found this embarrassing and loved it. It's a hole, she does it to everyone. I know, Harry said. I like it. Ron looked at him. Something in his expression was careful in the way he was careful about things that mattered. You're coming to the burrow, then? Yes, Harry said. For a week at least. And I want you to come to London. Both of you. He looked at Hermione, who was watching this exchange with the warm attention she brought to things she found genuinely moving but wasn't going to describe as such. My dad wants to meet you properly. Not the Hogsmeade introduction. Properly, at home. Hermione said, very carefully, I'd like that very much. He'll probably make you recite your threat assessment of every Hogwarts professor, Harry said. He does that with everyone new. I've already done one, Hermione said, with a brightness that was barely suppressed. I've been refining it since November. Ron stared at her. You've been doing a threat assessment of the professors since November? It seemed prudent. You didn't tell me. You didn't ask. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. A shared moment passed between them of two people who had spent a year making friends with someone who would never stop being exactly themselves and had decided this was entirely the right outcome. I love this, Ron said, about the situation in general. Me too, Harry said. King's Cross arrived with its particular noise and its pigeons and its people, the platform emptying with the organized chaos of an institution dispersing, families finding each other in the crowd with the reliable accuracy of love, which Harry had spent the year watching in the way he watched all things that mattered. He spotted Wade before Wade spotted him, which was unusual and therefore notable and which Harry attributed to Wade currently being in conversation with what appeared to be a station pigeon that had landed on his shoulder and was receiving a detailed opinion about something. Wade was in civilian clothes, jeans, gray hoodie, the specific combination of ordinary that meant he'd decided the day called for unremarkable, which it didn't require much effort to achieve when he wasn't wearing the mask, but the facial scarring drew its own kind of notice regardless. He looked up from the pigeon and saw Harry. The grin was the same one it always was. Immediate, complete, entirely his own. Harry pushed through the remaining crowd and Wade met him in the middle of the platform, and the hug was the one it always was, brief, fierce, the kind that said everything that neither of them was going to put into sentences because sentences were insufficient and they both knew it and had always known it. Harry held on for 2 seconds, 3, let go. You're taller, Wade said. I'm 11, it happens. I've had Hedwig for 9 months and I didn't send her back with a single complaint. Do you know how much restraint that took? She writes her own letters, Harry said. I had nothing to do with them. She sent me a drawing last month. A drawing of what? Me. Asleep on the couch. It was accurate and slightly judgmental. Wade looked past Harry at Ron and Hermione, who had come to a halt at a respectful distance with the measured approach of people who were simultaneously eager and giving space. "Weasley," he said. "Granger." "Mr. Wilson," Hermione said. "Wade," he said. "I don't do Mr. anything, it feels like a government form." He looked at Ron. "Your arm's good?" "Completely healed," Ron said. Harry's." The stabilizing charms he cast apparently bought enough time that, he read a medical magic text in February on the grounds that knowing what to do if someone was dying near him seemed practical, Wade said. Ron stared at Harry. "You told him that exact thing?" "I may have paraphrased it back to myself in a letter," Harry said. "You letter-journaled at your dad. Is that not normal?" Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. An entire conversation happened in the look, which had been happening with increasing frequency between them since approximately Halloween, and which Harry found both entertaining and quietly excellent. Wade was watching all of this with the expression of a man who was building assessments rapidly and was pleased with the preliminary results. He looked at the Weasley family arriving at the edge of the platform, the vast, warm, loud gathering of them, Molly already in motion toward Ron with the directional certainty of a heat-seeking hug, Arthur behind her looking at the station with the particular delight he apparently brought to all Muggle environments, and Wade said, to Harry, quietly, "The Weasleys." "The Weasleys," Harry confirmed. "They look exactly like you described." "How did I describe them?" "Like a house that kept adding rooms," Wade said. Harry looked at his dad. "I wrote that." Third letter, October. Best sentence you've written all year. Molly Weasley had arrived at Ron and was doing what Molly Weasley did, and then she turned and saw Harry and made a beeline with the same uncomplicated warmth she'd put in every letter since Easter, and the hug was brief and genuine and had the specific quality of someone who had decided 6 months ago that Harry was within the perimeter of people she considered hers. She stepped back, looked at him with the maternal diagnostic gaze he'd been cataloging all year through letters and Christmas at the Burrow. "You've grown," she said. "So I'm told," Harry said. "Are you eating?" "Reasonably," Harry said, which was the honest answer. She looked at this for a moment, decided it wasn't good enough, and said, "Harry, dear, reasonable isn't good enough. You'll come to the Burrow," in the tone of someone confirming a fact rather than issuing an invitation. "I know," Harry said. "Thank you." Arthur Weasley had made it through the family group and was looking at Wade with the joyful intensity of a man encountering something new and fascinating. "You must be Wade Wilson," he said, and extended his hand, and Wade shook it with the amiable bewilderment of someone who is being beamed at. "That's me," Wade said. "I've heard so much about you from Harry's letters, which Ron reads to us. We hope that's all right. Ron's letters tend to be somewhat brief on detail, and you sound absolutely remarkable." Arthur's enthusiasm was entirely genuine and entirely concentrated. A non-magical parent who trained a wizard child in hand-to-hand combat, magical theory, financial independence, and psychological resilience. The cross-disciplinary approach is fascinating. "I mostly just talked at him a lot," Wade said. "Communication is enormously undervalued," Arthur said, with conviction. "What sort of work do you do, if you don't mind my asking?" "Freelance problem resolution," Wade said. "And the problems you resolve are generally significantly worse than the problems people present publicly," Wade said pleasantly. "Which is a dynamic I suspect you're familiar with in your own work." Arthur considered this with the delight of someone who appreciates a well-constructed sentence. "The misuse of Muggle artifacts office does encounter a disproportionate number of iceberg situations, yes." He looked at Wade the way he looked at interesting Muggle objects, with the pure, uncomplicated pleasure of something being exactly as fascinating as advertised. Wade looked at Harry over Arthur's shoulder. Harry shrugged, which communicated yes, he's always like this, I told you. Molly was coordinating the logistics of multiple children going multiple directions with the cheerful military efficiency of a woman who'd been doing this for 20 years. Fred and George had already vanished, which was traditional. Percy was discussing something with Penelope Clearwater. Ginny, who Harry had met at Christmas and who had spent most of that meeting being simultaneously fascinated and determined not to show it, was standing slightly apart watching Harry with the large, dark eyes that were very much a Weasley feature but that in Ginny had the specific quality of someone taking notes. Harry looked at Ginny. She looked back. He smiled. She looked at her feet, then back up, and smiled too, which was a start. Right, Wade said, appearing at Harry's elbow. Logistics. You're going to the Burrow? For a week, Harry said. Then London. Then potentially a few days with Hermione's family if that works out. Her parents said yes. Wade asked. Her parents said they'd think about it and then her mother wrote me a letter asking about dietary restrictions, Harry said. Which I took as a yes. Smart family, Wade said approvingly. The letter was extremely organized, Harry said. There were subheadings. Wade looked at Hermione, who was saying goodbye to her parents, a couple who had the specific quality of Muggle parents in a magical environment, slightly overwhelmed and entirely committed to not showing it, her mother touching her hair once, quickly, in the way parents touched things they were proud of and couldn't fully say. Yeah, Wade said. I can see that. You're going to like her, Harry said. I already like her, Wade said. She sent me a 3-page letter in April analyzing the threat hierarchy of every adult at Hogwarts. Harry stopped. She sent you a letter? In response to mine, Wade said. Harry looked at him. You wrote to Hermione. In February. After the Quidditch match. I had questions about what she'd observed. You wrote to my friends without telling me. I wrote to people who were keeping an eye on you, to share information that would help them keep a better eye on you. Wade looked entirely unbothered by this. It's called networking. It's called going behind my back. It's called being thorough, Wade said. You wrote to me in September and said Hermione Granger reads everything she can get her hands on and has the most accurate threat assessment of any first year at the school. So I wrote to Hermione Granger. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he said, did you write to Ron too? Ron's letters are conversational and enthusiastic and focus primarily on Quidditch and food, Wade said. We've been corresponding since November. He's great. I already knew that from you, but it's always good to confirm. Harry opened his mouth. Closed it. You're not actually upset, Wade said. I'm processing, Harry said. You're not upset because you know why I did it and you agree with the why even if the method is slightly overreaching, Harry said. Proactive, Wade said. Those words don't mean the same thing. They overlap, Wade said. In the Venn diagram of good intentions. Harry looked at him, at this specific, irreplaceable person who had picked him up off a doorstep and had been relentlessly, loudly, warmly present for 8 years and who apparently, when Harry was at school, had simply expanded the radius of his relentless presence to include Harry's friends. Fine, Harry said. Fine like you've decided it's fine or fine like you're tabling it? Fine like I've decided, Harry said. But tell me next time. Noted, Wade said. Also Ron invited me to the Burrow for dinner in March and I went. Molly made pork chops. We didn't mention it because we didn't want to make it complicated. Harry looked at him for a long time. You went to the Burrow. Ron was very welcoming. So was Molly. Arthur asked me about 12 questions about non-magical weapons and seemed deeply satisfied by every answer. Wade's expression was its particular combination of entirely guilty and entirely unrepentant. Also their twins tried to prank me and it didn't work and now they want to learn how I spotted it and we've been corresponding about misdirection theory since April. Fred and George, Harry said. Brilliant, Wade said, with genuine admiration. Genuinely, those two are something. Harry stood on the platform at King's Cross in June looking at his dad and thought about what it meant that in 9 months of being away, Wade had not diminished the radius of his presence by a single inch. Had in fact expanded it to include every person Harry had brought close. Had found a way to be everywhere Harry needed without being in the room, which was, Harry thought, the most Wade possible solution to the problem of distance. "I missed you," Harry said, in the middle of the platform, in front of everyone, with the directness he'd learned from the person in front of him. "I know," Wade said. "I missed you too. A beat. A truly embarrassing amount. I watched Mulan 3 times. That's the allergies. I can have whatever I want," Wade said. "I'm the dad." The prophet ran the story about the Philosopher's Stone on the 3rd of July. Not the real story, not Voldemort and Quirrell and the trap sequence and the conversation in the hospital wing. The real story was too real, too specific, too containing of information that the Ministry had apparently decided the general wizarding public was not equipped to handle in a factual format. The story the prophet ran was something adjacent to the truth, with the edges smoothed and the most alarming details replaced with the language of bureaucratic reassurance. It did, however, contain Harry's name. Wade was reading it at the kitchen table in 4B when Harry came in from his run. He'd been doing the route he'd had since he was 9, up and around the park and back, which felt different in his body now than it had in June of last year, the growth of the year sitting differently in his muscles and his breath. He was cooling down with the window open and Hedwig watching him from her perch with the benevolent judgment she apparently applied to all his physical activities. "You've seen it," Wade said. "I assumed something would come out," Harry said, getting water. "I wondered what version they'd choose." "The version they chose is," Wade looked at the paper, "Harry Potter, the celebrated boy who lived, has once again demonstrated the magical community's enduring faith in his destiny by thwarting an attempt to access the Philosopher's Stone during his first year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Which is, a significant reframe," Harry said. "That's generous. It's essentially taken everything you did, the preparation, the relationships, the actual mechanics of what happened in that room, and replaced it with destiny." Wade put the paper down with the deliberate care of someone choosing not to throw it. "How do you feel about that?" Harry sat down across from him. He'd thought about this in advance of it, the way he thought about things he could see coming, not the specific version but the general shape. He'd known the story would be managed. He'd known his role in it would be described in terms that suited the narrative rather than the facts. He'd spent a year learning how the wizarding world handled information it found inconvenient. "I feel like it's useful," he said. "Not the reframe is frustrating. But the fact that they need to reframe it is useful. The thing they're protecting is the story of who I'm supposed to be. And as long as they're protecting that story, they're not threatening mine." Wade looked at him across the table. "What's yours?" "An 11-year-old who went down there with his friends and stopped Voldemort from getting the stone and came back and talked to Dumbledore honestly and came home for the summer." He shrugged. "It's not dramatic enough for the prophet." "No," Wade said. "It's not." He picked up his coffee. "Does it bother you? Not being dramatic enough?" "I'd rather be effective than dramatic," Harry said. "That's what I thought." Wade looked at him for a moment. "The prophet's going to keep running versions of this story. Every year, probably. They need you to be a symbol more than they need you to be a person." "I know. How are you going to handle that?" Harry had been thinking about this since the Burrow, where the Daily Prophet had been delivered daily and where the coverage of the Hogwarts situation had been the subject of multiple kitchen table discussions with Molly expressing concern and Arthur asking sharp questions about institutional messaging and the twins making satirical editorial comments that were funnier than they were supposed to be. "I'm going to let them have the symbol," Harry said. "For now. The symbol is a fixed thing, it doesn't grow, doesn't change, can't surprise anyone. If they're invested in the symbol, they're not invested in me, which gives me room to be me without constant interference." He paused. "The problem will be when those two things need to diverge publicly. When what I actually do stops fitting the symbol they're maintaining. That's going to be a confrontation. When, not if." "Definitely when," Harry said. "Voldemort is going to come back properly at some point. When he does, the ministry is going to need to decide whether to acknowledge it or deny it, and they're going to choose based on what protects them rather than what's true, and that's the moment where the symbol and the person can't coexist. Wade nodded, slowly. And then what? Then I'll do what needs doing, Harry said. Same as always. Wade looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through his face that was the complicated expression he had when Harry said something that was both right and sad, the expression of someone watching the person they love understand a hard true thing and finding both the understanding and the hardness worth grief. Yeah, he said. You will. Hermione came to 4B on the 14th of July with her parents, who arrived in the specific formation of two people who had been briefed by their daughter and had prepared extensively and were still slightly overwhelmed. Her mother had brought a plant. Her father had brought wine. Hermione had her threat assessment notes in her bag, which Wade somehow knew about and asked to see within the first 10 minutes, which established the dynamic of the afternoon immediately. Hermione's mother, Emma Granger, watched Wade and Harry interact for approximately 45 minutes from the position of someone who had grown up as a professional and had the diagnostic tools to apply to things she was trying to understand. She watched the way they argued, quick, easy, no heat under it, the argument as conversation rather than conflict. She watched Wade ask Harry's opinion on something and wait for the answer with the same quality of attention he'd give someone twice his age. She watched Harry push back on something Wade said and Wade change his position without making it significant. He raised you to be confident without being arrogant, she said to Harry, during a moment when Wade and Hermione were deeply invested in debating something about the threat assessment notes and could not be interrupted. That's very specific and quite difficult. He says arrogance is what you get when you mistake your abilities for your identity, Harry said. Confidence is knowing your abilities. Arrogance is thinking they define your worth. Emma Granger looked at him. How old were you when he told you that? 7, I think. Maybe 8. She was quiet for a moment. Hermione talks about you quite a lot, she said. She mentions you too, Harry said. She said your organizational methods are the most functionally elegant she's encountered. Emma blinked. She said that? In the context of explaining why her own systems are the way they are, Harry said. She tracks her intellectual influences. It was a compliment. Emma looked across the room at her daughter, who was currently constructing an argument against Wade with the focused intensity of someone who had been building to this moment since October and was thoroughly enjoying it. Something in Emma's expression was warm and private and entirely apparent, the specific warmth of recognizing your child in a place they fit. She's happy, Emma said, to no one in particular. Yes, Harry said. She is. At school she's always been a bit, other students don't always, she stopped. Tried again. She's brilliant, but brilliance is lonely sometimes, at that age. Not anymore, Harry said. Emma looked at him directly. No, she said. Not anymore. A pause. Thank you for that. She does the same for me, Harry said, honestly. I'm not giving her something that isn't reciprocal. Emma looked at him for a moment with the expression of a parent meeting a child their child loves and deciding what they think. Then she nodded once, with the decisive quality of someone arriving at a conclusion and finding it good. You're welcome here whenever you like, she said. Both of you. Harry looked around the room, at Wade and Hermione arguing cheerfully over the threat assessment notes, at Hermione's father who had found Wade's collection of extremely specific tactical manuals and was reading one with the focused pleasure of a man who has found an unexpected corner of his own interests, at Hedwig on her perch watching everything with the supreme authority of an owl who owns the room she's in. Thank you, he said. 3 weeks into summer, a letter arrived from Dumbledore. Not via owl, via fox, who materialized in the middle of Wade's kitchen with the spectacular disregard for personal space that characterized the magical world at its most theatrical, trailing fire, managing to make his entrance both majestic and slightly excessive. Wade looked at the phoenix. You couldn't call ahead. Fawkes blinked with the serenity of a creature that did not believe the concept of calling ahead applied to him. The letter was short. In Dumbledore's looping handwriting, on Hogwarts crest paper, it said, "Harry, I find myself wanting to say several things and discovering that most of them should have been said sooner. Let me attempt the ones that are not too late. You were right. The mechanism I built assumed a shape that you didn't have and didn't need. The protection your mother left you was sufficient without the isolation I'd constructed around it. I had conflated the sacrifice with the outcome when they were, as you pointed out, separable. This is worth knowing. I am working on what it means for how I proceed. Your father is not what I expected. I have been making inquiries, carefully, about Wade Wilson since September. What I found suggests a man of significant complexity who loves you with a completeness that I confess I find both admirable and slightly humbling. The fact that you arrived at Hogwarts knowing what you knew is, I have come to understand, not a complication of my plans but an improvement on them. I had planned for someone who needed saving. What arrived was someone who knew how to fight. The difference matters enormously. I will be honest with you going forward. Not in all things, I am not yet past the habit of managing information, and I suspect this is a limitation I will carry for some time. But in the things that concern your life directly, I will attempt honesty. This is the best I can offer and I recognize it may not be enough. The year ahead will be different from this one. The obstacle will be different. The threat will present itself differently. What will remain consistent is that I would prefer you to be ready. Be well. Enjoy your summer. Albus Dumbledore. P.S. Fawkes has become fond of you. He does not extend this to many people and I have learned not to argue with his assessments of character. Consider it information. Harry read the letter twice. Handed it to Wade. Wade read it once. "Huh," Wade said. "Huh," Harry agreed. "Is that," Wade looked at the letter. "Is that an actual apology?" "As close as he gets, I think. It's structured as analysis rather than apology but the content is equivalent." Harry looked at Fawkes, who was now sitting on the back of the kitchen chair with the proprietary comfort of something that had decided this space was adequate. He's going to try to be honest. Is he capable of it? I don't know. I think he wants to be and I think that counts for something even if it's not the whole thing. Harry thought about Dumbledore in the hospital wing at dawn, and the expression that had lived beneath the performance, and the genuine intelligence that was, when it was working honestly, genuinely extraordinary. He's worth keeping in conversation. He put you in front of Voldemort at 11 with limited support, Wade said, in the level tone that meant he had feelings about this that he was managing rather than performing. He also built the mechanism that kept Voldemort from the stone and kept me from dying, Harry said. Both are true. Wade looked at him. You're too reasonable about this. I'm exactly as reasonable as the situation requires, Harry said. Being angry at Dumbledore is a legitimate response. Being only angry at Dumbledore is incomplete. He paused. What he does next year matters more than what he did this year. This year is done. Wade put the letter down. He looked at Fawkes, who looked back with the implacable dignity of a bird that had been alive longer than everyone in the room combined and found them all interesting regardless. What do you know about Gilderoy Lockhart? Wade said. Harry blinked. The defense position. Next year. He's the current candidate, from what I've been able to find. I've been reading everything available on him for 2 months. Extremely successful in terms of public profile. Published extensively. I have, Wade reached into the stack of papers on the kitchen counter that passed for his filing system and produced a folder, some concerns about the specificity of his practical knowledge. Harry looked at the folder. At his dad, who had been researching next year's defense professor since April. Who had written to his friends. Who had gone to the Burrow. Who was sitting here in the 4B kitchen with a phoenix on the furniture and concerns about the specificity of a professor's practical knowledge. Let me see, Harry said. Wade handed him the folder. Harry opened it and started reading. Fawkes made a sound that in a human would have been approval and in a phoenix was approximately the same thing, and settled his feathers, and the summer light came through the kitchen window the way it always had, warm and specific and completely ordinary. They were on the fire escape that evening, which was where the important conversations had always ended up. Wade with his beer, Harry with a soda, the Brooklyn skyline doing what it did, indifferent and enormous and lit up in the particular way of cities at the specific hour between day being done and night being fully committed. "You all right?" Wade said. "Yeah," Harry said. And then, because Wade would wait him out anyway, "I'm thinking about the year." "The whole thing or a specific part?" "The room at the end." Harry looked at the skyline. "When I was standing in front of him." "Voldemort." He turned the word over, feeling for how it sat now, after. "He didn't know what to do with me." "No. He expected fear. He's built his whole existence around the fact that people are afraid of him." And when that wasn't there, Harry paused. He was recalculating. "The whole time. I could see it. What did that feel like?" Harry thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything that mattered. "Good," he said. "Not because I wanted him to be afraid of me. But because it confirmed what you've been telling me since I was 9. The fear is the mechanism. It's not incidental, it's structural. If you remove the fear, the whole architecture of how he operates changes." Wade was quiet for a moment. "He'll adapt. I know. He's not stupid. He'll find a way to operate that doesn't rely on me being afraid, or he'll find a way to make me afraid, which are two different problems." Harry looked at his hands. "I don't think he can make me afraid of him. He can make things happen that I don't want to happen, he can hurt people I care about, he can create real consequences. That's different from fear and I need to not conflate them." "Yeah," Wade said quietly. "That's the thing. The real things that can go wrong aren't about you. They're about the people around me," Harry said. "Yep." A silence. The city moved below them. "Is that why you wrote to Ron and Hermione?" Harry asked. "Partly," Wade said. "Partly because I wanted to know them myself. Partly because people who care about you should know each other." He paused. "Partly because when something goes wrong, not if, when, having a network that knows what's real is the difference between getting through it and not." Harry looked at him sideways. "You're worried." "I'm prepared," Wade said. "That's different." "Is it?" "Worry is passive. Preparation is active." Wade took a drink. "I'm not afraid for you. I know what you are. I know what you can do. I watched you become those things." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm aware of the variables I can't control, which is different from fear. It's just, accurate." Harry understood this. He sat with it the way he sat with true things, not trying to change it, just making room for it to be exactly what it was. "I'm going to be okay," Harry said. "I know," Wade said. "I'm going to be okay too. When you're at school, I mean. I'm aware that's not a question you asked but it seemed worth saying." Harry looked at him. At this scarred, specific, catastrophically loving person who had built a life around him with such thorough commitment that the life they'd built had become entirely real, had texture and weight and history, had a phoenix on the kitchen chair and a Weasley matriarch writing letters and friends who sent threat assessments. A life that had happened instead of the one someone else had planned. "I know you're okay," Harry said. "Yeah. You're the most okay person I know." Wade made a sound that was definitely not the thing Hermione had identified as a specific vocal pattern associated with being moved, because that would require admitting to it. "Don't get sappy. You literally teared up when we watched Allergies. Toy Story 3 last week. Emotional allergies. That's still not a, I can have whatever I want," Wade said. "I'm the dad." Harry laughed. The laugh was easy and complete, the Brooklyn night receiving it with the indifference of a city that had received all kinds of sounds and found them all equally worthy of its darkness. Hedwig appeared from somewhere above them and landed on Harry's shoulder with the solid comfortable weight of something that considered this its rightful position, and Harry put his hand up and she stepped onto it and they looked at the skyline together, the three of them. "Second year," Harry said. "Second year," Wade agreed. "Lockhart is going to be a disaster." "Confirmed disaster," Wade said. "I've read everything he's published and run the statistical analysis on his practical claim accuracy and it's not good. There's also," Harry paused, "the chamber. I've been reading about Hogwarts' founding history and there are references in the secondary sources to a chamber of secrets that Salazar Slytherin supposedly built. The textbooks dismiss it as legend but the primary sources are consistent enough to suggest something real." Wade looked at him. "You've been researching the second-year threat since when?" "March," Harry said. "The Lockhart thing I picked up from the publication patterns in February. The chamber I started looking at in April after I found a reference in Bin's recommended supplementary reading for first years, which Hermione and I both bought but I think I'm the only one who read the footnotes." Wade looked at him for a long moment. Then he pointed at Hedwig. "She knew." "She's an owl," Harry said. "She has better judgment than most people I've met," Wade said. "She knew what she was doing when she landed on your shoulder." "She landed on my shoulder because she considers it hers." "Same thing," Wade said. Harry rolled his eyes, but gently, and held Hedwig up and she spread her wings and went, and they watched her go into the dark air above Brooklyn, white and silent and entirely purposeful. "The chamber is real," Harry said, coming back to it. "Show me what you've got." "Tomorrow. I want to finish reading 2 more sources first." "When did you request them?" "Last week. Flourish and Blots is posting them." Wade nodded once, the decision-made nod, the "I've thought about it and this is the answer." "Tomorrow, then." They sat on the fire escape a while longer. The night was warm and the city was constant and the door in Harry's head was quiet, thoroughly quiet, the presence behind it gone to wherever disembodied dark wizards went when they were regrouping. The quiet wouldn't last. Harry knew it wouldn't last. He held it anyway, the way you held the good stretches, not because holding them made them permanent but because letting them be real while they were real was the whole point. Wade said, after a while, "You did good this year." "We did good," Harry said. Wade agreed. He raised his beer. Harry raised his soda. They clinked, and the sound was small and specific and real. "Summer's not over yet," Harry said. "No," Wade said. "Still some left. What do you want to do with it?" Wade thought about it. "Tacos. The good place in the East Village. Then maybe see if the Weasley twins want to come to New York, because I have follow-up questions about the misdirection theory we've been discussing and I think in person is better. Then whatever you need before September. Training, research, whatever the chamber situation ends up requiring." He paused. "Maybe teach you to drive." Harry looked at him. "I'm 11. So. The legal age is 16. "That's a concern for future Harry," Wade said. "Current Harry should know how cars work." "That's not a good reason." "It's an excellent reason. Knowing how things work is always a good reason." Harry looked at the skyline. He thought about September, and Hogwarts, and second year, and Lockhart who was going to be a disaster, and the Chamber of Secrets which was probably real and probably Slytherin's and probably involved something he hadn't fully mapped yet. He thought about Ron and the Burrow and Hermione and her parents and Dumbledore's letter and Fawkes asleep on the kitchen chair and Hedwig somewhere above Brooklyn doing whatever Hedwig did at night. He thought about a doorstep in November 8 years ago and a man who rounded a corner whistling the A-Team theme with taco sauce on his mask and looked at a baby and looked at the universe and said, "You've got to be kidding me." He thought about what had happened instead. "Tacos first," Harry said. "Obviously," Wade said. "I'm not a monster." They went inside, and the summer went on being the summer, and somewhere in the wizarding world the story of Harry Potter was being told in the wrong version by people who'd never met him and never needed to because they'd already decided who he was. And in a kitchen in Brooklyn a boy sat down at a familiar table under the spot where the ketchup had been and opened a folder about Gilderoy Lockhart and started making notes, and his dad put the kettle on and started talking, and the door in the boy's head was quiet and the world was large and the night was warm, and none of it was finished yet. Not even close.